know if you could tell it's on full screen now, but I'm off that thing. So kind of, if you want, like I said, just kind of take over, and I'll just let you, hold the reins and kind of go from here.
All right. Okay, guys. So Garry Hashman, this is Steve. Steve's gonna help me out today. We're gonna go over Smash Pass series. This is something that I kind of learned maybe halfway through Purple Belt and started falling in love with it. Had a lot of success, especially in competition. Home gym is where I kind of honed it, and then I took it to competition and was able to use it quite successfully. So I'm going to share that with you guys today. We're going to start out, and we'll just start out talking about in guard. Now, you can get, standing guard breaks. Everybody has their favorite, and I'm going to kind of keep it simple today. I don't want to do anything too big. Whatever your favorite guard break is, you can use it. We'll also talk about approaching an open guard and getting to this. But anytime I'm here, especially if most of the stuff we're talking about is knee stuff today, I always like to have my double lapel grip. I kind of turn my elbow towards the hips and settle in. And then if I can, I want to have the sleeve of the other hand. All right, so I have the sleeve, I have two lapels. I'm going to make sure that I have good posture. I kind of like to curl my spine, like my tailbone is kind of riding underneath his hips, and that's going to stop him from being able to kind of pull me down. So if we do get pulled down, let's say he gets pulled down, I want to have my hands on the inside. My hands are never on the floor, and I want my hands on his shoulders or on his, I kind of like putting them on the biceps and his armpits. That way I can kind of push myself back up, get here, good posture, get my grips, sleeve. And then the break that we're going to do today is I'm just going to hold on to the sleeve. I want to make sure that I don't rock my butt forward too much because that makes it easy for me to fall down. I want to step up strong, hold this sleeve. The sleeve comes with me. And I'm going to step up again here so that I'm in like this squat position. And then I squat and stand up. I bring this hand up with me. So after I bring this down, my hand is going to come to his thigh. I even like to step back a little bit and point my knee to the outside so I can smash this down. As we push this down, I want to slide this down. We want to worry about the belly heave. So he wants to kind of get around so he can angle off and get this foot through. So when I smash this down, I want to make sure that my knee is pointing out. It's tight to his thigh. This hand, keeping a hold of this hand, kind of stops him from running, right? So he can't escape. My free hand is going to go to the collar, and I'm going to make a wall with my arm to my elbow. This is going to pinch him in here. He can't run away. I want to control the foot, step back, and then saddle this foot here. So all of that together again. This is going to bring us to the headquarters position. All right. So two lapels, sleeve, keep everything kind of tight, elbows tight. Step up, squat position. Pull him up with me. This hand, I'm pulling him up. I don't want him to have the ability to create angles. So I keep his sleeve. Step out, knee pointed to the outside. I'm here. I want to gather the collar, bring it to my elbow, or my elbow to my knee. Control the foot, step over and get into the saddle, right? And so that's going to be what we call the headquarters position. You want to talk about that, Butch, or you want me to just keep moving on?
No, I mean, well, quickly, I guess, because that's all perfect. Two things I was going to ask you, just just the leading questions for new people. Obviously, the leg that you step up with is important too, right? Because you are controlling that wrist or that hand. So maybe talk about that for a second. Like, you don't want to step up on the other side, right? Because you might get your leg underhooked.
They start looking for the hook sweep. I can actually talk about if they do go under that leg. So as we were saying, the importance of stepping up with this same side, I don't want this hand to be able to scoop my leg. If I step up to the other side, he's going to be able to scoop, right? So if I get here, he's able to scoop underneath my leg, maybe start looking to sweep me or bring me around. Holding onto the sleeve, keeping everything tight, stepping up here, he can't get to that leg, right? So now it gives me the freedom to get up here, boom. When we go here, he could, right? Boom, get under this leg. And if that happens, I'm just gonna kind of pinch my hips in, right? I can keep a hold of this and just kind of wait, but I want my hips to be pressed into him. I can still kind of push this down if he keeps on holding this. And basically just take this down. I'm still doing the same thing down like Eva, is killed because he's over here. He'll eventually want to properly straighten out, maybe even try and hip away at a knee slice. But I have to stand up. I have to stand up with the other leg first, so he can't scoop that leg. So now that hook sweep is gone. Up with him, I bring him up here, hand inside the thigh, step back, smash down. My knee is pointing out so he can't go de la Hiva. Elbow connected to my thigh, step out and in, and then I squat. So I'm kind of like floating on top of his leg here. Elbow stays connected. I've built a wall so that this leg, he tries to bring this leg back in, it's getting stuck here on my shoulder.
Now, would you ever, this is just a personal question, would you ever switch grip there on the top, like if you underhooked your leg?
Yeah, so I would say standing up in guard, 90% of the time I probably lapel grip with my right hand and then sleeve grip with my right hand or my left hand. I just realized that this is backwards on here, so let me flip this. I can flip the screen.
Yeah.
Video settings. Is that better? That's better. Okay. You're like, what are you talking about? Use your right hand. You're using your other hand. Okay. Yeah, I would say if I ever enter into the headquarters position with the other side, so I'll do a scan just so you can see it with the flip screen. Now that the screen's right. Stepping up, I usually step up with my left leg, boom, up, pulling on the left side. Usually, if I ever enter into it, into the headquarters position, I like to pass to my left, but I would enter probably in an open guard and get to here to start headquarters position. I think it's a preference thing.
So, like, kind of building on that too. So, like, if he underhooked your leg there and you couldn't step back, you have step 2 or step 3 that you do there, or you can always step back. That makes sense as a question. Your right leg.
Time. You got a little row body on me again.
Yeah. So let's say that you stood up. Everything's exactly the same, but he underhooks your right leg, right? And
yeah.
You like to step back because that kind of helps break the guard, but you can't step back because he's underhooked your leg. What is your next step from there, or are you able to break the guard regardless? Does that make sense?
Usually, I can break the guard. As long as I have a good grip on the sleeve on the left side. I see what you're saying now. So, boom, I step up and I get here and I pull and he goes underhook here. Yeah. So he's probably looking to set up some sort of hook sweep. I guess I could probably try and step out of that, but that puts me off balance a little bit. From here, I would still probably just try and break this open. So my hand coming in here, I'm still pulling on this sleeve. And I can usually just kind of smash him. I'll fold him up on top of himself, pointing my knee out. He's going to have a hard time of escaping this, as long as I got a good pull here, right? I'm keeping this, all the tension is gone, or all the slack is gone in the sleeve. So really pulling the sleeve up. Have my sleeve grip, step, pull this up with me. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have any space to go underneath. He can only go shallow underneath my leg.
You know, that's important too, because like you said, if you don't pull his hand up there and keep your elbow tucked, I mean, there is a chance that he at least goes for an omoplata or omoplata roll, right?
Yes, yeah. If I'm lazy here, now he can start omoplata on this side and go heavy. So I keep all of this. So when I do stand up, this comes up with me. My elbow stays tight. I have this, all the slack is taken out of his arm. And so he doesn't have the ability, he would have to shoot clear up to the ceiling with his hips to go omoplata.
Are you consciously thinking of head alignment towards, you know what I mean? Like you're standing up straight. I don't know a good way to put it, but you know what I mean? Like, are you thinking I need to keep my head above my hips or not bend over or you're just good?
Yes, yeah. And that, I think that's probably a good practice in general, as far as like guard passing, is to never let your butt go above your head, right? You can be overhead swept, just even You think of butterfly sweeps. All that happens is when the hips get elevated above the head. Makes you easy to topple. So whenever I stand in guard, if I'm doing a standing break, I make sure that my head is up. I tell my kids, find a spot on the ceiling, right? Concentrate on that spot on the ceiling. If my head's down, I'll tend to put my head down. So if I'm looking up, my eyesight's up. I'm not going to have a problem finding the ceiling, standing up, and keeping a strong back.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's what I was thinking. I mean, one of the concepts that we kind of go over, really, to be honest, is because of the Henzo guys and the Tom DeBlas, that they talked about.
Yeah.
They're like, never let your head go above theirs in particular, right? Just because if we're talking about, like, obviously we're talking full guard here, but if we're talking like deep half or even being swept from any position, butterfly or anything, you start to get your head above theirs in particular, along with above your hips, right? Then that's just like you said, that's where you're going to get swept. So if you can kind of keep a concept in your head, whether it's keeping your head above your hips, right, to keep a straight back, or just not keeping your head above theirs, like always being conscious of that, you're going to avoid more sweeps and reversals, basically. Right? I like the point of me saying that really too is also like I just try to, like, one of the roadmaps that I try to teach everybody, what you're doing perfect too is the same thing, is I just make some really general concepts that may be true like 90% of the time, right? And say, if you do this, it's gonna be a lot harder to sweep, or even if you don't know what's coming, right? As long as you're in the right, your body's not getting above itself and you're not doing something bad, you're gonna probably be good. Hopefully you agree. But yeah, no, that's perfect. So I think that's all I was thinking. And then you said that's perfect on daily heat. A lot of people don't realize how simple it is in a way. If you're like, if you stand up like you just did and the guy's trying to get daily heat up, but you keep that knee pointed out, you can't really get the position that they need to get in the daily Heba hook, correct? Like it's basically useless. Your foot may be kind of wrapped around, but it's not actually in the pocket there. You don't really have daily Heba, correct?
Yeah, it makes it a very weak daily Heba. You want to be able, in my experience playing daily Heba guard, like I want to be able to create angles that way I can almost get behind them when I'm using my hook. And with my knee pointed out, when I stand up, boom, and I put this knee out, their hips can't get around my leg. And if their hips, if their leg, if their thigh can't get around my leg, they don't have an effective hook to create the bridging necessary to wrap the leg. They don't have the angle to cut across my thigh from inside out, outside in. They can't wrap through and get across my thigh because their hook is too weak.
Yeah, it's perfect. One question, this is just for me, like, do you have a difficulty standing in somebody's guard, I guess, in that squat position at all? Does that make you tired or,
So I used to, but something to help me with the motion. I think a lot of times in jiu-jitsu, first of all, most of the guys who do jiu-jitsu or gals who do jiu-jitsu are not mean people. And so we try and be nice with the partners, but sometimes it can't be nice to do the move right. So whenever I stand up, don't be afraid to put a little pressure down, right? So my knuckles kind of driving into his gut a little bit. I'm strong here, and the first foot is usually not the hard one. It's the second foot coming up that's difficult. So if I think about one, the push with my hips, and I kind of push down on him just a bit, and that's going to give me enough to get here, right? And it happens quick. Once I get here, I don't want to hang out because he can start looking to scoop. So I immediately stand up. So I don't want to set that squat position in the first. And then the second part is after I break this open, slide it down, pull this in, step back, and get into the saddle. My hips are driving forward. If we do it from the side, once I get here, my hips, I'm not bent over with my butt in the air. I'm sitting in and I'm pushing into him. So I'm kind of in a squat position, but he's still kind of carrying my weight a little bit. Mm-hmm. So once I get here, that's going to set me up for all my stuff later.
Yeah, no, that's perfect positioning too for guys that don't realize why on one scale too. Like just going back to the daily Heba that we're talking about. If I was defensively in your guard, right? I was trying to get De La Riva. You had your knee pointed out, which means I can't get my leg in, just like you said, across the thigh or whatever. Then my next step would be put my distance foot on your hip, push you away to straighten your knee to where I want it, right? So that's pointed out. So if you're stepping over that distance foot right away, you're really you've taken out every aspect of the De La Riva of that attack, right?
So I stand up, boom, I get here. He has the weak De La Riva, I smash it down. I get here, he realizes that he can't have that De La Riva. This foot is usually going to go here and start to push me.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so before he has the opportunity, my free hand, I've already created my wall here, my free hand is going to grab the ankle and almost like leg drag in fashion right now. Obviously the leg drag would be on this side, but I keep this heavy so that he can't use it, right? And then I'm going to step back and then squat on top of it. And now I'm kind of riding that.
Mm-hmm.
That way that distance foot, he doesn't have the ability to push away and make that space with that foot.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, that kind of shuts everything down, right? You're thinking ahead. Because like we always say, jiu-jitsu is a game of counters, right? You do something as a defensive guy, immediately looking for the counter. So if you know that guy's step 2 is to put that distance foot in, kind of straighten you out, you're attacking the shin and stepping over and kind of killing that leg right away. Essentially, they're kind of screwed, or you're at best you're putting him into like kind of a weak half guard attempt of a game, right? Like this deep half or just whatever version of a half guard, right? That's awesome. The other thing before you move on, one other question: do you ever like to? Obviously, a slightly different game. Have you ever played with or been one of those guys that did that exact same kind of pass, but you picked the guy up instead, with that double lapel grip, up, shake him down off your legs? Does that make sense what I'm asking you?
You call it taking off the pants.
Yeah.
Where the guard is around me. So I've done it a couple times. It's not been something that I like to do because for a couple reasons. If he's already chosen guard, he's probably going to shoot, especially if it was early on in a match, or I guess you could say in a fight, but obviously this is more irrelevant. If this was early on in a match and he ended up in guard, me and his guard, he probably chose that, or I got a takedown. So it means I'm probably going to be there again. So I don't want to expend all the energy of standing up, shaking down, and carrying his whole body weight. I mean, I can do it with Steve. Steve's smaller than me, so I can kind of do it with Steve. We get here, boom, I stand up. We're here, and then pick him up, and then try and slide his legs down. But picking up all of his weight rather than just pulling up the sleeve, there's a lot. Even Steve, there's a lot more effort that goes into it. I want to do things efficiently. So once I get here, if I pull this up, pull the slack up, he's still carrying some of the weight on his shoulders, rather than me picking him all the way up here and having all of his weight hang on me, and then trying to fight him down. Also, him getting collar grips. My personal preference is not to shake him down that way. I don't want to expend that energy.
And I agree with you. And actually, for the exact same reasons that you said it, that's a good pass. To be honest, actually, that's one of the passes I learned coming from the Gracie system, and that's like at the time, I don't know now, but anyway, I still see some high-level teams doing that pass, like pass, right? I don't know if I see it as much, but anyway, the point is just exactly what you're saying, is that I'm not knocking that pass. What I'm knocking is that I'm a heavyweight, and so most heavyweights are like you and I roll, right? Like picking each other up like nonstop every time we go like to pass guards, just not the most efficient thing, right? When we're probably already getting kind of tired of going with the big guy. The guy, the difference too, and that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit today too, is like a big guy game, right? Is that when big guys get into position finally, if you make it, meaning you or me or whatever, you get in side body, you get in mount or even half guard to that degree, as long as you're on top, the goal of big guys, right, is to take away space and kind of smash you the entire time, right? So meaning that, especially for me, like that takes my cardio away the whole time, and vice versa. Even when I'm the other person, I'm constantly doing things like that to take their cardio away. Like if I'm rolling with a smaller person, I would beat you for that belly and things like that more for the reasons of trying to tire them down, right? So anyway, it goes back to what you're saying is that I'm sure you're the same as me. We're not knocking that pass. It's a great pass, but maybe.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think the other thing too is, especially even though it would be easier to do against someone small, anytime I've stood up with someone small and they feel me open their guard, they usually just jump back to their feet. And so I stood up and now we're standing again. So now I need to do another takedown, or I need to worry about him doing some sort of either, flying technique if it's a smaller guy, if it's an absolute division. So now I'm going to be, aware if he jumps guard or if he goes for, flying arm bars, triangles. That's something else that I have to worry about. I've already got him kind of down. I would rather just keep him there. And then talking about the takeaway space, it's important against big guys to take away space, but it's been my experience that it's even more important to take away space against little guys because they're able to exploit the small windows better than what a big guy is. So if I'm rolling with somebody, like Wes or with Ryan, I have to stay tight. I have to keep things smothered because the smallest window is an opening for him to regain guard. It's a window for him to escape to my back, and I have to be more diligent about my space management and keeping that game tight.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think too, like one of the concepts of speaking of that I always went with somebody too is, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is I'll tell people like you worked so hard to pass or gain position, and then if you did all that work and then you were just not tight at the end or you're making some really like just goofy mistakes, you waste everything you worked so hard to do, right? That's pointless, right? So it's more like once you get to position, I mean, especially as this big, you have that lockdown and make them suffer, right? Because you got there, right? So, I mean, that's a defensive philosophy. But anyway, yeah, if you want to get to the next step, that's perfect. Because, like I said, sorry to interrupt. I'm just trying to hit some.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start back here. Everything else we'll probably just do from we'll do this one more time, kind of get into position. So both lapels, always being aware of my arms, have the sleeve step up left, upright, squat, kind of like squat motion, pull this arm up, smash this down. I have this wall built. I want to grab the lapel, bring this to here. Like I said, control that ankle, step back, squat on top of this ankle. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to do an X pass. So this wall is super important. We talked about that. We don't want him to rebuild his guard on that side. And then I have the pant grip is available here on this knee. So I want to keep everything nice and tight, right? I'm going to kind of take a baby step with this left foot, this outside foot, and that's just going to be for base. I want to be able to move a little bit. I don't want to step clear up here. We already talked about him hooking, so I don't want that availability, but I do want to step out a little bit for base. And then I'm just going to do an X pass from here. So my butt is going to raise just a little bit. I'm going to move my base. I don't want my butt to come down, my head to come down, my butt to go up, but I'm just going to move my base a little bit so that I'm over top of this leg, and I can kick that off. And then I'm going to replace my foot right by his hip, and then close this off again, right? So now my shin is up here against this. I'm going to be looking to scoop the head on this side. He doesn't have a lot to do other than to shrink away that side. As he does, I just kind of collapse on him, side body, get my under the forearm, and get into side control. So one more time, we'll go ahead and go from headquarters, reined in, right? I get the pant grip on the outside. I want to push a little bit, maybe even step out a little bit for base. I'm going to kick, and then from here, this foot that's in the air now just gets planted. My shin gets stuck to like his butt. My foot is kind of under his butt cheek. I'm driving into him, reconnect that wall, and then I can either come to him slowly, but he's probably going to move away. Boom, into side control. I always like to tell my guys, I'm a big guy, and it's either weight or it's fat. If I'm in top, It's fat if I'm on my knees. If I'm up in the air, it's weight. So I like my guy to carry my weight forward, right? So try not to let yourself, I still want to be low to the floor. Here, I'm still low to the floor, but my weight is on Steve. Here, it's better for Steve, right? And we're talking about making that guy suffer. If I get up in the air a little bit, put my weight on him, he's wearing me. My hips are still low, right? I don't have to worry about being rolled or anything like that, but he's feeling the pressure rather than me being on the floor. So one more time, from headquarters, boom, I have the wall. I release, get the knee. If I have to, move that a little bit so I've got my pivots or my base step. I'm gonna shoot, push this pass, step in close to the hip, reconnect my wall. If he shrimps away, I just follow. It's almost kind of like going knee on belly, and then I melt into him. If his legs, this is kind of important, guys. You know, a lot of times, guys are really good at immediately shrimping. If I keep my hips close to him, regardless of what he does, if he shrimps, I can kind of keep here. But the other thing is if his legs are close to me, boom, I can use my hips to walk him back so that he needs his hips to be facing me. Go ahead and turn to shrimp and get guard back, right? So anytime I get into side control, I like to walk his hips away from me. So now that his knees are pointing the other way, if I flatten his hips, I'm not so worried about his shoulders, right? I want to smash this away. That's going to be really important later on too, what we're doing.
So that essentially is a good concept right there. So how would you label that? I mean, other than what you just said, which was pretty obvious, but would you just, to simplify that, say if I keep their hips facing away, they can't really regard kind of deal?
Yeah, if their hips are facing me, that means their butt can scoot away. Steve, you don't like. If his hips are facing me, he can shrimp his hips away. But if I have him pressed down and I walked his legs that way, before he can shrimp, try and shrimp that way. Can't. He has to turn his hips first. So if I can keep his legs pushed away, it's a two-step process than one. The first thing he has to do is bring his legs back, and now he can move his hips away. So by being here and feeling his hips towards me, if I walk his hips back the other way, it's a two-step process now. He has to turn his hips, and now he can shrimp, right? And that makes the race a little bit easier for me because he gives me an indicator I'm getting ready to shrimp.
So is that a concept that you built over time, or did you kind of borrow it from somebody, or how did that come about?
It was definitely borrowed. I definitely stole that straight from Lovato Jr.
Which is no problem. Everything that we do is borrowed from somebody, right? It's jiu-jitsu. Like we didn't make this stuff. So that's perfect. I mean, it all makes a lot of sense because just like every position of guard passing, there's a bunch of ways you can do it, right? There's a bunch of ways you can hold side body. There's a bunch of theories, concepts. But I think that's awesome, right? It's pretty sound. You're directly addressing the problem, right? The guy's trying to shrimp, which means he has to get the hips away. They got to face you. So if you're making him face the opposite way, he's got to, like, kind of like what you said around about, it's a two-step process now. Like, recognize that process while they're trying to do step one, you could be altering your game altogether and doing something different. You know, that's awesome. I mean, makes a lot of sense. That's what I think. I think the goal of today is a lot of those things, some concepts that people just don't think about, right? And they just roll, and maybe they're doing it correctly and they don't know why, or maybe they're not. But I think even just the other night, we kind of said, like, here's the key about jiu-jitsu or anything that we do is you got to know why you're doing something. And then if you do, everything's way more, it's just way easier. You just have a better game plan, right? What steps you're taking because you know what you got to do to kind of keep things and keep them in a downward spiral, I guess. The other thing I was going to ask you, so that's a good pass, obviously. So do you guys, as a group or as a gym, do you put people in that position, meaning that squat position, holding the gi, holding the knee, and then step back and kind of pass? Is that like ever a drill that you guys do before class or anything, or especially maybe if you're going over today, with your class?
Yeah. And there's definitely we'll do some certain pass drills. I try and do drills specific to that day. So I know if we're doing a certain pass, I try and, maybe we'll do a lot of X pass. So yeah, it'll just be, him being a willing participant and just stepping back and coming here and then coming back. So just here, that way I can get used to that pass. And then when it comes time to show the move, our hips are already kind of warmed up. Our body kind of knows where we're supposed to go. The other thing is we do a lot of, if I know we're going to do standing stuff, it's funny because we don't really do the pants, taking off the pants so much, but I do want to be aware that, in this, if I try and stand up, he might grab a hold of me. Okay? He might grab a hold of me and try and stand up with me. So as a good, and it's, this is kind of like the physical fitness part of it. To start out class, we may do drills where I stand up with him, squat down, back up. That way I can get used to that strong stance. Because when he doesn't hold on to me, it makes this so much easier.
Yeah.
Right? So I think those drills are important for trying to drill or do warm-ups that prepare us for the drills.
Yeah, no, and I think even that is another good concept because sometimes we forget, like, for example, like I don't think, especially in my gym, let's say, I don't know about yours, but I'm going to say where you guys are probably similar. We don't play guard a lot with a hand in the collar, which is old school, right? That's nothing wrong with that. You guys still hear me because I know the video kind of messed up, but anyway, can you hear me or no? Right now. All right, so we're back recording. So I think where we left off before we had technical difficulties, what I was asking you for is that sometimes I think the important thing is to prepare for games that might not necessarily be ours, meaning that maybe the guys at your gym don't use me. And what I was leading at is that used to be that everybody, once you're in somebody's closed guard, like everybody put the hand in the collar, right, and try to keep your posture down. That's kind of the general concept of jiu-jitsu, and I'm not saying that it's wrong now. What I'm saying is that's just not what we do, right? As a gym, I think, especially coming from Marcelo or in De La Hiva, the reason we don't do that is because we're actually looking to get into De La Hiva and work from there. So if I was working on the collar and keeping your posture down, then it's kind of not exactly the same game. I mean, I'm not saying that we couldn't lead them into the same game, but the point is, like, if I roll with guys in the gym, and probably the same with you guys, I just don't run into a lot of guys working my collar like they used to. That used to be the main thing, and I was always trying to defend collar chokes, keep an eye out for the other arm. So even just saying that, every now and then we have a lot of guys that travel, and they might be in Charleston for work or something. And every now and then we'll run into a guy that does that, and he'll catch a couple guys in chokes because they're just not used to having to defend that the whole time, right? So anyway, the point is, like, that's a good point. Like you're saying, I think we kind of left off where when you're standing, sometimes you're going to have to worry about, like, if the guy has your collar and you decide that you're going to stand up, then you're pretty much going to be lifting them up at that point, right?
Yeah.
Now, is there anything you do? Like, if they grab your collar, are you trying to break that grip first, or you're just like, screw it, I'm just still going to do the same pass? It doesn't matter.
No,
right?
it's kind of situational. A lot of times I don't mind so much. So if he's, if I do have this here, I'm not so concerned with him. I'll go ahead and bring him up with me. I still want to make sure that I have all of my fundamentals good. I stand up and guard the same way. Boom, I get here. And if he wants to hang on, that's fine. I feel strong enough to hold him. But he's eventually, this is kind of where that pants, they're taking off the pants. And as it happens, they will usually let go because it's hard on him to keep that. I still need to make sure at this point that I have everything out. My knee out, that way he can't go De La Hiva. But it's going to be hard for him to hold on. Usually what you find is, it's been my experience that when guys have that, and I do stand up, they start monkey climbing all the way back up to like a closed guard. So he'll like climb himself back up here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I do have to be aware, but he's gonna have a hard time choking me with one hand. His legs are getting tired, and I've still got this hand. I never let go, right? And so I'm not gonna relinquish this so that he can choke me. And so I can feel Steve's getting tired, so I'll bring it back down. But when I do stand up, my hips, he's kind of like resting on my thighs, so I'm not really overexerting myself. And he's got to really squeeze in order to stay there where I'm relatively relaxed. I have the hand in this hand, so the other hand is in my collar, and I'm picking it up, yes, but he's burning a lot of energy with his legs. So I'm not too worried about that.
And to go back to what you said earlier, which is still the case, I find when people are doing that version defensively, that they're more likely to try to disengage your legs at some point and stand up with you, right? So is there anything that you do if you start to feel that, or you think, hey, this guy's going to just try to hop to his feet? Is there anything at some point that you transition to make sure that doesn't happen, or try to like slam him down real fast, or what do you do at that point?
Yes. Okay. So if I feel that he's gonna, if he wants, and that's exactly right. If I feel after I get here, he's already committed to a collar grab, he can't grab me with this one. I stand up, and I see he still has this here. A lot of times I will just kind of chill here. But if I did come up and I was here and I felt him disengage, as I feel his legs open up, I just squat down with him, right? So he can't, what he's wanting to do is get his hips away from me so that he can get his feet back in here and push me away, right? So he has his collar broke, and I stand up with him, and he goes here, and I sit back down with him, right? And now I'm already kind of getting into this space with my elbows inside. He's opened up his guard. Maybe I can kind of build this wall here and start to get into my headquarters position, squashing down on his hook, maybe getting ready to do that pass.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So basically, and that goes back to all of our concepts too. You just know that that's one of the defenses they can do. So you're just waiting for it, and then you still do the same game. So that's perfect. That's what I want to do, is just address some of these situations, right? Like there's ways that people are counter, and it doesn't mean that it's going to stop your game. That's just that, kind of, here's a couple of things that could happen when I do this. So I have to be ready for those couple of things, which is not that big a deal, and then still stick in my game plan, which is what you're doing. So it's perfect. And the point of me, again, asking all these questions is to lead newer guys down the direction of why, because like any move that we do, or any concept or anything that we do, that's the cool thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is there's so many different directions that we can head down, right? And I think that sometimes as a new guy, that confuses you, because it's like, for example, and this is one of the things I use with the new guys a lot too, is like one of the first things you learn is like an arm bar from somebody being inside your guard, right? So does that mean that you can arm bar everybody? Actually, probably the complete opposite, right? We learn this move, and then you can't land that arm bar forever, because basically everybody knows if I'm in somebody's guard, there's so many submissions they can do, and I'm looking for those submissions. And then what changes is how the style that I pass and where I put my arms, and then how I protect myself at that point, depending on where my connections points are. So anyway, the point is I like to bring that stuff up, because I hate for sometimes people like, well, I tried that and it doesn't work. Like, well, you tried that and it doesn't work because they did this and you weren't ready for that, right? Or something. Yeah. So no,
that's the hard thing with the class scenario. It's like I will try and bring it up afterwards, but that's sometimes that response is a whole other class of its own.
For sure, yeah.
And so that's the hard thing about that I found as far as teaching. Like, I definitely want to cover that. Like, what if they do this? And that's the nice thing that we have here, is the long form, the long conversation that we kind of go over that. But in class, it's a little more difficult to say, okay, if they did that, oh man, we're taking a whole nother, we talked about flowcharts and stuff. That's a whole nother leg of the flowchart sometimes.
Yeah, so, and then you go down a rabbit hole where you're not really teaching, right? Because I've run into that too, especially when I was teaching, if I teach seminars, a jiu-jitsu seminar to a traditional karate place, right? It's like they're a little bit more defensive sometimes because it's like sometimes I feel like depending on where I go, that it's still old school. It's like everything I do, they want to tell me why it wouldn't work against what they do, right? It's not that they're accepting to learn. And that, again, this is not everybody, but I've taught some seminars and they've said, well, what if the guy did this? What if the guy did, it's like the entire time I'm teaching, they're like, what, because I would just do this. And I'm like, yeah, I know, exactly. That's what jujitsu is. It's constantly countering. But if I come in and say,
at that point, I'd just be like, let's just fight.
Well, yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, those exact scenarios, most of the time you're there for the nicest right? It started on good terms. And then after so many questions of what if, or that wouldn't work against me, at some point you're about ready to snap. And then, you know, so I try to avoid that situation because again, like I get it to a degree because quite honestly, I always try to look at things from the flip side, right? We're guilty of that too. Sometimes somebody looks at like a Mike Tyson or Floyd Mayweather, and they'll be like, well, they don't know ground stuff. So like, you know, so like a white belt guy could be like, I would just take him down and submit him. Well, yeah, theoretically, but we have to give credence to some of that stuff. Can you really close the distance? Can you really accomplish a takedown? Can you do all that? Like, I mean, we hope so, right? But let's just don't assume all these things, right? So anyway, yeah, so that's perfect. That's what I was like I said, it's difficult, like you said, like you can go down a different way. And just for people that don't know too, as teachers, there's a reason you do things the way you do it, right? You have to concentrate on, let's say 2 to 4 moves in a class, because the best way to have somebody remember nothing is to show them everything. So the more that you show somebody, the more likely it is that we leave class and everybody's like, man, it was a great class. I don't remember what we did. You mean like they don't have a mastery of anything, right?
That's a lot of times that's seminars I've been to, and that's the reason I kind of became a note taker at seminars, because I was like, man, I went to an hour and a half seminar, and the 90 minutes I was busy the whole time, and I remember seeing the coolest stuff, and I can't remember any of it.
Yeah,
and it's because we see rather than an hour class where there's a warm up and we work 3 moves, we went to this seminar that was an hour and a half long, worked on 15 moves. And I remember the one setup that we started the thing with, and then the move that came after that, and then I was lost.
And at the same time, you know, like that's the point of a seminar, right? Sometimes, depending on the seminar, who's teaching it, you jump around, right? You're not always just, you know, doing the same position. I mean, most of the time it should correlate to a degree, but it's a little bit harder if you're not doing just deep half or just a pass like you guys are doing, you know. You kind of jump, and that makes it harder to remember. Then, you know, the other side is, guys, you got to remember that's the point of a seminar, right? Like if I'm going to spend the same amount that I spend for a monthly jiu-jitsu membership for one day for 2 hours, I would prefer to have as many moves as I could. Now, the difference is it's up to me at this point doing like what you're doing, which is another good point. Cause I see like example, our seminars when people come, nobody really is taking notes other than like I think you did the last time and some other guys, but the good guys know that you need to take notes because you're not going to remember anything, right? It's a little bit different. And there's nothing wrong with the seminar being taught that way. I think that we should be used to being taught that way, thanks buddy, to a degree anyway, right? Because I'm spending double the amount of whatever it equates, you know, to learn all that stuff in that short amount of time, right? But I think it's important too to realize like that's the difference in the teaching. So not everybody gets that, because I mean, even as a teacher, I know sometimes when I have people cover class for me, they do that. You know, that's why like the person may be great at jiu-jitsu, but when they cover the class, it's like they get down too many rabbit holes because they're like, here's the move. And like, you know what, the guy might do this, so then you do this, and then you know what, he might do this, and then I have to do this. And it's like by the time they're done with the initial move that they taught, they've showed 4 or 5 moves in that little bit of time, and they say, all right, break, and let's go back to, you know, the move that I showed. And everybody's like, man, I don't even remember what you were talking about, you know. And that's not wrong. Like it's bad. Like I think as a teaching, it's not good, but I know why they're doing that, right? They're trying to be a good teacher because they're trying to cover all the avenues. And then I think sometimes those guys think like, for example, like when we teach a move, like somebody they might be in like the crowd saying, well, I know the counter to that. That doesn't work, right? Like I'm not saying that happens but even our normal guys, like I don't use that because of this. I'm like, yeah, but like you still need to know the fundamentals to start this move. And also
that's not necessarily true, because like if we go back to the armbar concept, right? Like I still get arm bars from guard. You know how to defend them, but it's a part of the setup of how I baited you to be in that position, or you know, blah blah blah. So it doesn't mean that every move that we do just because you know the counter doesn't work. You know, and sometimes that's the other thing. Maybe you're going for it knowing it's not going to work, but you're setting up move 2, move 3. Which is, you know, not to get down a rabbit hole, even this talking, but sometimes that's another talk that I have with higher level belts, is that I said it's difficult. And the reason I like to roll with higher level people is sometimes there's moves that I'm working on, and I'm sure the same for you. But the only way that I can get to that set of moves is if you do the specific counters that I need you to do, right? And sometimes that means that it has to be a higher level person because his knowledge is not at that level quite yet, right? That's not a knock. It just means that if I want to do certain things, I've got to have you respond a certain way, you know. But anyway, you know, it's neither here nor there, I guess. It's just kind of more just talking about concepts, which is the point of this, right? It's just talking those little things. But anyways, I think we kind of stopped with, we covered everything, a version of passing. So I think you've kind of left off into, you know, a little bit of squatting position, but definitely.
Yeah, we're talking about squatting position. I'm going to go ahead and move on because I think we talked about side control and the hips, but the next thing is kind of, it is kind of that, what if they do this? So I get into, the headquarters position I'm here, and if I try and push, a lot of times I get the response, and this is just kind of like jiu-jitsu, this is just natural instinct, is that if I push you, you push back, right? So if I push his knee this way, his natural instinct, he knows that I want it to go that way, so he pushes back. So he knows that if I'm gonna, you know, I'm doing this, and I'm trying to set his leg in line to that side, he pushes back against me, or if his natural instinct is that he wants his hips to be facing this way, he may push back. So regardless of the reason, if I feel pressure this way, rather than resist that pressure, I'm just gonna go with it. So I shuffle step and bring this to the floor and drop my knee. Now I've also brought my elbow down. I'm driving my elbow down, and I'm just gonna slide past. When I slide past, I turn my knee down. I would like to get a hold of this sleeve and pull this up again. Now, so I've got the free hand. I want to get a hold of this sleeve, pull this up, smashing down my elbow. I've got the wall again, so this leg on this side can't fight back in. I'm not up, so his knee can't come underneath and make a K guard or anything like that. So I've got everything walled off on this side. I'm not letting him have the underhook. I have the sleeve. I point my knee to the floor, and then I'm just going to slide past until my knee is pointing straight out. And then I'm just staying heavy on him, and then I'm going to inch myself past, and then I walk him back until I can get into side control. I know it sucks, Steven, I'm sorry. So do that one more time. I was into the headquarters elbow wall. I have the outside grip. Maybe I get ready and I feel him put that pressure out. As soon as I feel that pressure out, it's a shuffle and bring him down. I put my knee across his thigh. We're gonna turn. Shuffle and bring him down, knee across the thigh. Get here. I like to, and we was talking about this the other night. I like to get my head in here too. The more of my body that I use, I'm staying super tight. Now I can just inch past. Once I'm past, I use back walk now to turn his legs, and then get into side control and lock everything up.
So speaking of just one of the things that you said from the other day, like, would you ever put your head underneath their chin in that position, keep them down, or?
Yeah, if they're really trying to come up off the floor, if they're really trying to like use their shoulders up off the floor to make a little bit of space to turn their shoulders, see if you want to do it to me. Are we okay in the screen there, Butch?
Yeah, that's perfect, man.
Okay, so we're here. If I'm pushing back this way, he shuffle steps and he goes Nika. If he uses his head, he can bring his head low. But it's not my first thing to do, like my first instinct. My head is here in case they do this. But a lot of times guys will like start to turn up like this and like use their head. If he puts his head down, now he can stop me from bringing up. I don't have that momentum to come up. He's not giving me the space. And then on top of that, if I do try and come up as I go down, if he pushes with his head a little bit, now he flattens me out even more. Now he can like slide past and then walk his hips back to flatten my hips out. And now my hips have started to turn the other way and he's in side control. So I'm using my head there as a means of holding him down, not letting him, because on bottom, what I would like to do, ideally, go ahead and do that one more time, Stevie. So boom, he goes to slide. I'm going to use my head to kind of like, almost like deep half, but I'm trying to come up to my elbow maybe, trying to get onto my elbow, and that's going to help me turn my hips so that I can get my hips away. If he puts his head down, he's pushing here, now I can't get up onto my elbow. So even if he has a weak grip on this sleeve, and maybe, you know, maybe I'm a little bit stronger than Steve, I've done a little more rows this week, he can't get this nice pull. Go ahead. He can't get this nice pull when my arms are all the way extended. So if my elbow's down, if my head is able to rock up onto my elbow, if his head's up, if I'm able to rock up onto my elbow, he's got a lot more to deal with. So if he stays down here, I can't rock up. Even though I'm stronger than Steve, I can't rock up into him, and now he can gingerly pass. Boom. Lots of pressure on me and walk my hips back and get into side control. So he's using that as a stopper.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, that same position, quite honestly, on my own, I kind of figured it out through trial and error, but mainly because of what we were saying earlier. Rolling with big guys, right? Whether they're stronger than me or not, they're just big guys. Sometimes, you know, they can roll to I might have everything perfect, and they're just able to kind of get their elbow to the mat and start to kind of wrestle, try to get into a single leg takedown. And then I think somewhere along the line, without even just hearing, but I just realized, like, one of the things that I always talked about when I was teaching is, I think we've all used it, right? Where the head goes, the body goes kind of deal, right? And so then I kind of thought about that concept, and I was like, oh, I bet you if I just put my head under his chin and force it a different way, I'm going to be okay. And then I was like, well, yeah, you know, which goes back to the same thing. Like, I'm always looking for concepts. So it's kind of like overgeneralization, but it helps in a situation where I was like, what do I need to do here to reverse engineer this position where I'm having a hard time? Because normally, maybe sometimes a simple answer would be just pull up on that sleeve grip, right? But it doesn't matter sometimes. Meaning, like, if I'm too late, you know, like if Garry or Steve here, like if you sniff out the position as I'm passing, knee slice passing, and you tuck your elbow, it's going to be very difficult once your elbow's tucked for me to pull it back out, because that's where you're strongest, is getting your arms closer to your body. And, you know, and then if I'm trying to pull your arm out, then I'm probably going to put my upper body in a not as an advantageous position, right? Because I'm like extending out, which also now is going to leave me out over, you know, not correct balance and, you know, all those things. So, so anyway, that's perfect. So, I mean, like, literally, like, you guys are doing awesome, because everything leads us into a position where we can kind of talk about concepts, which is my point, right? So all these things should help people. And then you guys listen, that's the other thing, is just because Garry and I, or Steve and I, or all of us, like, have a certain way or a certain path, it doesn't mean that there's not another one, right? Concept wise or theory wise, or, you know, so think of those things. But no, that's awesome. Do you guys have anything to add from there, or anything you think of? Or
Really, the only other thing that I would really like to go over, and this is kind of this has become my bread and butter as far as like my top game, is the side smash. And before I actually do it, the idea is I want to have his legs crossed over one another. And if we think about guard recovery really kind of comes from the bottom leg, right? He's not trying to shrimp. If I'm in side control on this side, he's not shrimping to get his top knee in. He's shrimping to get his bottom knee in. So if he's made frames, he's here and he shrimps, he gets his bottom knee in first, right? Or the knee of the side that's closest to him. So I'm going to try and take advantage of that, because the top leg is not the leg that will re-guard. And the way I'm going to do that is I want to put him into a position where his legs are kind of crossed, the knee is over in front, and then my weight is going to be distributed across this top thigh. And that's going to hopefully cause a lot of problems for him to be kind of stuck. I'm also going to kind of flatten him out here. So this is kind of the shape I want his body to be in the end of this. Okay, so we're going to go back to our headquarters position. Boom, I've made my frame. I was here. I got to the grips here, and a lot of times what happens, especially with the Lahiva guys, they immediately, maybe they'll control this lapel, maybe they'll control my sleeve. It's kind of indifferent on which one that they do, but he's got my ankle, he's got my Achilles grip. I still made my wall, my knee is pointing out. I can't really shuffle step this way because he has that. You know, I can't do that knee slice pass because he has my Achilles over here. So I'm gonna turn my body and I kind of turn my whole body this way, and then I'm gonna drive across. As I drive across, I'm looking to smother his hips here, and I'll show you in the back view here in a minute. Smother his hips, and then I'm gonna kind of frog out on his legs. So I'm here. I would like to get a cross face. I don't want to have an underhook, but everything else that I'm gonna do is coming from this. So turn around if you would. So from here, I have the grips. He's got my Achilles. I don't feel like I can go anywhere. My knee's pointed out. I'm gonna turn my foot, and then I'm just gonna drive across, and then slide down so that my hips are kind of straddling his legs. My pelvis is sort of holding his hips, and then my underhook on his head, I'm trying to flatten him out and kind of keep him here. I've got 3 passes to do from here. Is there anything you want to talk about before I Butch?
No, I think what I was actually thinking of is I like that concept, and it's good that there's a different point of view, because a lot of times, so like you put, like the way we talked about too is, I'm trying to think of a good way to put it in words, but like where you're pushing their hips away, and the reason you think of that way because they have to have them facing you is all like awesome. In a good way, good general concept for people to follow, right? And a little bit different than maybe perhaps what I do is kind of the same thing. I'm just trying to keep my knee glued to somebody's hip, which I don't follow their hips as much as you, quite honestly. And I think your way's better, to be honest with you. But the reason I do that too, though, is like a little different concept, because I've rolled with some really giant freaking people that were like 350, 400 pounds, and anytime, maybe sometimes I could be pushing their hips away and the person just rolled me over their head, which obviously means that I had a bad weight distribution and my head got over the top, right? I got top heavy. But knowing that that's happened a few times, I've kind of changed, you know, I try to stay heavy the different way, which is still fine. It's a different version of the same kind of thing, right? I have my own concept version. But basically what I'm saying is I really like the way that you explain it, the way that you do it, because it'll apply to anybody that's big or small. In particular, if we're talking about rolling with smaller people, and we kind of are, right? Because this is a big guy smashing a small guy, but it's a big guy. This is your game versus big guys or little guys. But the difference is when you roll with a smaller guy, the reason they're so flexible and able to get, they're just smaller, right? If you're bigger or heavier and you're rounder, for example, right? It limits your flexibility in the way that you're able to kind of slide a knee in or slide a leg in and do all these kind of things. So anyway, I think it's great because you're smash passing, you're doing everything right, but you're addressing, like they're not going to invert on you because you're working on keeping their hips the opposite way, which kind of, because of that concept, makes it difficult for them to invert, makes it difficult to, anything, to just slide a hook in and get a guard back, slide a hook in and get a half, anything. So I think that's a really key concept for people to listen to. That's above and beyond probably even what I'm teaching, because it's a different way. So I guess major props to that, but I like the way that you're teaching it and telling everything to everybody. So does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it does stop the inversions, which I guess I know that, but I don't think about that. For him to be inverted, he would have to have the freedom of his hips to get onto his shoulders, right? Mm-hmm. And so by staying so tight, he's already committed to the Achilles grip here. So I'm not so worried about him letting go of that. He's trying to use that as a lever to move his hips, or a lever to leverage to change his orientation. And so he's telling me that he's kind of committed to that. And if that's the case, that tells me if he's committed to that I can't necessarily do my X pass. I can't do my shuffle step to go to my knee slice pass. So if he's committed to that, now I'm just getting my chest, I probably should have pointed this out too. I'm getting my chest behind his leg. My head is still high. My butt is still low. I'm relatively comfortable in this position. And now I'm just driving. It's kind of like doing walking shots in wrestling, like when you're doing warm-ups. So this would be another warm-up drill that you could do before these, is now that I've changed the orientation, I'm behind his hip. And we had already talked, if he decides to shrimp away, if he lets go, and he decides to shrimp away, I can punch that grip down and drop my shoulder on him. The bottom leg is the leg that he needs to regard. So as long as I have this grip, he can't regard. You can try, you can shrimp, and I can follow because I have that pamphlet. So he's not going to be able to regard because the bottom leg. His top leg doesn't really bother me so much. The bottom leg is the one that regards. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the pass because it's kind of using the same concept. After I've smashed him down, let's head this away. So it's like, so I get here, he has the grip. I realize that I can't do my other passes. I turn and I drive over top, and then I saddle on top. The first thing that will happen is I need to get some sort of path to inside his elbow, right? So if I can, from this, and kind of like I call it frog hips. So I'm heavy on his thigh. My belly, my chest is kind of on his thigh. I'm here trying to use my chin to keep him from turning towards me. And so if he tries to turn towards me, my head is kind of holding him there. And then I'm going to use this to open up a little bit of space. Now it doesn't always work, but the times that I can make it work, I'm going to take this knee and insert it into his armpit. So I'm here, frog hips, heavy hip pressure on his thigh. And then I'm going to go knee into the armpit, hug the head, and get tight with the head. And this kind of goes back. This kind of goes back to what we was talking about, super tight smash pass, right? He's suffering right now. He doesn't like this. At this point, it's just me sliding. I float. I know he doesn't feel good. He usually tries to clear his hips. As he bumps to clear his hips, I float to mount. Stay low because my arms, I don't want to get bumped and rolled to that side. So I stay low, head to this side, wide out to this side. Maybe I can start walking this up and attacking, but it starts to set up my attacks.
Now, so not to skip over some stuff because that's all awesome stuff, but I think I like what you're doing on mount. I think one of the things that I've seen from people in general is from mount is they don't do that position right there, staying low, wrapping the head, shoulder pressure, because they're afraid to be rolled, right? I think that's the general thought process. I'm kind of guessing for other people, but I can remember like when a long time ago, probably late 90s or 2000s, something like that. But anyway, Mario Sperry on like a VHS tape that I have an instructional, which again, kind of oddly enough, is from our lineage, right, from Carlson Gracie and stuff. But he was teaching that how to hold mount. I remember back then I'd be like, man, I don't do that because I'll get bridged and rolled, right? And then he came out with a follow-up because so many people were saying that. He was like, look, man, like I do that. I know they're going to bridge and roll me. If they get that, I'm stupid. I put all my weight on the other side. The point is kind of like what we were saying earlier, as a big guy, or just even as a smash bass or like theory of staying tight, is you're supposed to make that person as uncomfortable as you can the entire time. So if you're on mount and you're just sitting on your knees straight up and hoping that they're just going to stick their arms up like UFC 1993, it's not going to happen, right? The only way to make that stuff happen is to get there, put shoulder pressure on, make them uncomfortable to where they start trying to throw you off of them because they can't breathe and they're miserable. And then you're going to get those things that like people, quite frankly, aren't that dumb anymore, right? Like I haven't had even people off the street, they just don't like push me like they did in 1993, right? People know that now. Like you just generally know.
Yeah, well, and go ahead and go down, head towards them. The thing that I like about that too is by offsetting my weight to the other side, I almost, I want to, personally, I feel like if I have a head and arm, that there's not really a lot that they can do. I'm not in any danger, even if I do get bump and rolled, if I have a head and arm connected somehow. So I will use this. If I can walk this arm up, you know, I can start looking for all my attacks. A lot of times what will happen, as long as I'm low and my weight is on this side, I don't really feel like I'm in any threat of being bump and rolled. But if he does, usually what will happen is he knows his arm is vulnerable here, and so he'll clear it. He tries to bring it in front of him, and he rolls. So that's just, he's giving me stuff, right? And so now I've got back takes. I'm staying tight. Maybe I can set up an arm triangle, an arm bar. So it doesn't bother me if he tries to bump and roll. He can hold on to this arm as tight as he wants. I've almost got a head and arm triangle. The arm bar is there. The back take is there. And so his bump and roll is actually opportunities for me to move on. And that's, you know, like we said, the rabbit hole going down to the what if he does this next. That's the path. That's the next branch. You know, 1A and 1B. He decided to go 1B, so I need to go to my attack off of that.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, roundabout too, for people that don't think about it, like you are already dictating which way that he can shrimp to try to escape. If that's the main escape, which we all think, you know, obviously it is, but if you're wrapping the head, essentially cross-facing, right? They can't really push on that knee. So now you've limited like one side. You're kind of, like you said, you're putting them down a pathway where you know more answers than that guy, right? Hopefully, you know.
Yeah. I like to, I've got a lot of metaphors that I use with my guys. One of my favorite is, anytime I'm in a dominant position, like the goal is for me to set a fire and there are 2 exits or 3 exits. And I try and shut 2 of the doors and there's 1 exit and I just race him to the exit.
Mm-hmm.
If I can race him and beat him to the exit, then I will get that submission. So, you know, I want to trap him in the fire.
Which is a good point too, because I think we've all been there, right? Especially if whether we roll with our instructors or when you first started, where you know, and around it, like you've gotten good enough to know that you're being set up, right? You're like, surely, you know what I mean? Like he's giving me an arm bar, you know what I mean? Or something like that. And you're like, I don't know if I should take this move because I feel like there's no way that this is open or something, you know, or
right.
Things, yeah.
And the inverse too, if like you've been able to get somebody who's better than you and maybe they're working their escapes and you get to a dominant position and they know that what, like you were saying, like if they know that there are 3 exits, mm-hmm. They try and set you up to try and chase them towards one of the exits and then duck out the other one. Yeah. So it not only does it work with danger, but it also works with getting out of, like being in danger, but also getting out of it.
Yeah, and then quite frankly, I mean, this is your game too. So I mean, like that's the other thing is that, for example, when I roll with Marcelo, he's a smaller guy than me. You know, like let's say just for the sake of just round numbers, I'm 250, he's 150. Let's just say that. But he'll put me in reverse Keisakatami, right, or reverse scissor side control, whatever term you want to use. I know that he's setting me up to do stupid things, but after like 10 minutes of me not being able to get out, I'll start contemplating the dumb things, which is essentially what you're saying, right? It's like, you're like, all right, well, you know, I know if I do this, I'm going to give up an arm bar and he's going to go for it, right? But like, again, after 10 minutes of being punished, I'm like, well, I'm going to go for it. And I know he's going to go for it. And hopefully I'll just suck my elbow back down and I'll be okay. And then 99.9% of the time that doesn't work. And I'm like, it just is what it is. I couldn't get out. You know what I'm saying? You know, which is jiu-jitsu, right? It's like sometimes it's making somebody do something that even they know is stupid. It doesn't always have to be like we secretly trapped a guy. It's just there's no way out. And it's like, I'm going to go for it. And I hope I get who's better, whoever's faster is going to finish that position, right?
That's the beautiful part of this side smash. And Steve will tell you that like I use this side smash a lot in my top game, is that if I'm patient and as long as I've got good base, and I'll kind of go over that here in a minute, but as long as I've got a good base, I almost always go to mount. I don't have to choose to take the back side control, the front side control. I almost always go to mount because I'm not suffering. He's suffering on bottom. I don't feel anything. I'm kind of laying on him. That's all I'm really doing. And at that time, I'm collecting myself. I'm, easy to get my breath. There's no compression of my chest, so breaths are easy. I can think about my setups. I'm not expending any energy on grips. And he is suffering on bottom. He's dying over there because it's really like Eddie Bravo's Twister without like the finishing pressure. So your body is completely contorted, and it obstructs your breathing. Guys land on top of you, and it burns your legs out, your hips out. So that's what I really like about this too, is that it takes very little for me to make maximum suffrage for him. As terrible as that sounds.
It does and it doesn't. I mean, it's the same thing. I teach that concept all the time. Like if a person's worried about breathing, then they start forgetting about, kind of like we said, doing the stupid stuff. It's just more like if your goal now becomes to breathe, then you're gonna forget. Like I need to keep my elbows tight. I need to like guard my neck. I need to do that because you're desperate, right? And that's kind of what you need to do is put them in a desperate situation, like you said earlier, starting a fire, and then they have to just do whatever. And then hopefully, that's the point, is that you put them in that trap and then you finish it, right? Like otherwise it's, didn't do anybody any good. But typically that at least you're putting them in your pathway. And then as you get better and better, you're going to start finishing those spots, and I know just from here, like reading your guys and other texts and stuff that, I generally know your version of mount, but do you ever go to S mount or technical mount? Is that ever in your playbook?
Yeah, I love horses. I like actually like the kind of gift wrap control where some people, there's another word for. I've always called it gift wrap control, but
it's the same. We call it "Who's your daddy" as a joke, but
yeah. So I'll talk about that a little bit. I like to actually. I have ways of setting it up, and we kind of talked about this the last time we were talking. Is I will attack Americanas to get them to turn, and a lot of times people will want to come, and then I'll come here. I don't normally initiate an S mount from here without him responding to something I'm doing. But another thing that I'll do is if I'm low, maybe his hands, he's doing a good job of protecting his neck here. His hands are inside. I will use my hand on his elbow to keep it chopped, and then I'm going to alter myself so that my chest rides his elbow across, and then as he does that, then I can get into this modified mount nice and tight. And then I usually, my personal preference is to take the back, and I like being behind somebody where they can't see what I'm doing. So I get into kind of like Kimura grip. I tuck my toes into the back and then drag him to me. And I will keep this across just because I have setups on the other side if I keep this leg across. But most of the time he will be fine with me just taking his back. From here I can start to climb to get a high back control. But I do like tacking from that S mount, usually to take the back.
A couple of things that I was thinking of, like while you're doing that, do you just kind of take it backwards? So once you get in the mount, other than obviously having the like hooking the head and staying low and everything, like do you cross your feet when you're on mount or drop your hips or anything? Or are you staying heavy on the chin and throat? A little bit different kind of deal.
So for me, head that side. For me, it's really I try my initial is to tuck my toes together. I don't necessarily like to cross my feet so much. I know a lot of people do. I like the freedom with my legs. That doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. Maybe I am wrong. I don't know. But I usually go with a head hug on one side, counterweight, and then I tuck my toes together so my toes are touching. I don't know. Spin this way, kind of straighten your feet a little bit. I bring my toes in so that my toes cross, but I don't like crossing my feet because I feel like that makes me too rigid and a little more easy to tip. And it also makes it harder for me to like change my base and windshield wiper my feet. So I just kind of put my toes on top of my toes. And so that's kind of where I start. And then everything changes with him at this point. So if he goes to push the hips, You know, keep pushing it on the hips, then I'll drive here, and then peel these off, and then I return. If he decides that he wants to get to his side and start to, if he's elbow escaping, whatever it could be, I just go with whatever he's doing, and then I try and answer whatever he's doing until I'm ready to do my setups. And really, it's kind of like what you were talking about when Marcelo will get you into that reverse casing Tommy. I'm waiting. I will wait this out. A lot of guys, I think, get frustrated because the choke isn't immediately there, or the arm bar isn't immediately there, and I'm okay because I've gotten 3 points for passing the guard. I got 4 points for mount. I maybe got a takedown. So I should be, if I'm here, I should be in pretty good position if this is a jiu-jitsu match. And then if this is a fight, why would I want to leave this position? I'm in the best position. I can wait until the cops come or whatever. So I'm happy here. I think a lot of people try and hurry through stuff. They want to start really attacking and going all out for arms, really attacking and going all out for chokes. And I think that's when a lot of times people, boom, they get bumped and rolled because they're trying to push the attack. I want to settle in. And as far as my feet are kind of free. I will tuck them as much as I can, hip pressure down a little bit, and then squeeze it. I do like to squeeze my knees if I set up. So if I want to set up in mount, rather than tucking my toes so much, I keep my toes in towards his hips, but then I squeeze my knees a little bit, right? And so now that squeeze is gonna stop him from having the freedom to move. If he turns, that raises my hips up, right? So now my hips are higher, that's gonna make it easier for his escapes. So in order to eliminate that, I pinch my knees and now it's harder for him to turn, right? Because now I can kind of like set on his hips, I'm squeezing. Even if he bumps here, I can kind of ride that wave. And so if I decide to set up and maybe start attacking here, maybe trying to get arms across or whatever, so get arms across, I can use this squeeze to stop any of the other movement. Eventually, if you wanted me down, you could probably bring me down, in which case I start attacking my low attacks.
Yeah. That's good. And what I'm noticing here too, while listening to you talk about mount position, is a couple of things. Is one, you have a vast mount game, meaning that you have answers to a lot of the common counters, and you've kind of got some different directions you go to depending on what they do. At the same time, following general concepts, right? So it's kind of making it a little simpler than what it really is. And I mean that in a good way, because really, like, you look at that on paper and somebody's like, he's like mounts, right? Like Gary's got mount. But like when I see you do that, I'm thinking of all the little things that you're doing that other people don't notice, right? And even really you kind of gloss over in a good way, just saying like, I do this because they do this. And I mean, there's like 20, 30 different things on a simple mount that you're doing because of, the ways the guys are going to escape, or different things that can happen, different positions you have to go to for different reasons. Which the only reason I'm bringing that up is because I don't want to overlook it, meaning because one of the things that, like, especially I teach newer guys, and you guys may or may not agree, is that I find, especially up until blue belt and sometimes blue until purple, is people avoid mount because they say, I don't have any submissions or nothing works, right? And then my answer to that is, that's because you have a shitty mount. I usually say just like that. It's meant to kind of be, as a joke, but it also serious, right? Like if you're the mount, that essentially, if we just really break jiu-jitsu down to the most basic things of self-defense, that is supposed to be the most dominant position. So if you're getting there and you're getting rolled all the time, or you're getting there and you're not being dominant, that means you just have a shitty mount, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? You can't. I think people use it as a crutch, is like that I'm better at side body, or I'm better at Keisagatami, I'm better at this. Well, yeah, no shit. We're all of us are kind of like in that position, right, where we have a go-to thing. But I don't think it's just like the same thing. If I have somebody's back and they're constantly getting out, then I need to work on my back control game, right? And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean the other guy that's getting out is not good. It just means that
that's where I need to learn. Like, you should be getting somebody's back, and in general have better than 50-50 odds at finishing, because that's your position. It's the same as mount. If I get there and every time the guy shrimps out or bucks and rolls, or I don't get a submission, that's not right. I think even if just keeping the most basic things, if you're getting that dominant position, the odds should be in your favor, more than 50%, right? Hopefully higher, but just more than 50%, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of times too, you know, when people come in and if we're teaching self-defense, you know, blue belt curriculum, it really relies on all those fundamentals. So that's the stuff that you teach first, is all of the defenses for, you know, what if you're stuck on bottom? How do you get somebody off of mount? We've already learned all of those basic escapes, and so we know the first things we learn in jiu-jitsu is like how to stop somebody from hurting you when they're on top of you, whether it be chokes, arm bars, punches, that kind of thing. Like if somebody's sitting on my chest, that's the first thing that that I teach my guys, you know, on their way to blue belt, is like, you don't want to get punished here, right? And the punishment from being mounted is punches, it's arm bars, it's cross collar chokes, and so stop those. And I think what happens is people kind of like you said, the arm bar is the first thing that we all know, the first thing we all learn, but because we all learn it first, we also learn how to defend it well first. I think it's the same thing with mount. It's like the first dominant position that we're taught, but then everybody knows the defense now. And I think patience kind of goes a long way in this. I remember I would leave mount to go to side control or knee on belly. That way somebody would turn and give me S mount or a technical mount, and I could work from there because they moved when I was at knee on belly, but they wouldn't move when I was mounting. But now, like, it's changing my game where it's like, okay, if they don't do that, then I can do this. If they do that, then I can do that. And like using my chest to move to technical mount, moving, you know, attacking the Americana to get them to defend that arm, and then I can progress to technical mount. Because my personal interest is technical mount, because then I can take it back. I like having the back. I like them not being able to see what I can do. And sometimes I can even flatten them out on their stomach, which I think is the worst position in all combat sports, is to have somebody hooks in, you're flattened out on your stomach, and they can sit up and punch you and choke you. And so if I can get there, that's where I want to be.
For sure. And the other thing too about technical mount, right, is you are putting your body in a situation where their hips in general are no longer valid, right? Their hips aren't underneath yours where they can off balance you and flip you over, because now you've situated your body at an angle where it kind of makes their hips not as useful, right? I mean, that's another reason it's good. And then, you know, foreign concepts is every time you create an angle, right, you're ahead pretty much, right?
Right. Yeah. The other thing too is, if we think about this in MMA or in a street fight scenario, if he's flat on his back, as I start to punch, his natural instinct, if I start to throw a punch, he probably will bump. Boom, and now my hands are down. And if we get to technical mount and I'm here, I have an elevated leg, which gives me an elevated hand. So now it's easy to rain down a lot of damage in an MMA fight. I can use this hand to kind of like frame off and throw punches. It's going to make it hard for him to turn back into me. So I have a lot of pressure down on him, holding him in, and like you said, it's negated his hips. He doesn't have the freedom of his hips. In order to get out, he almost has to get back to mount.
Yeah.
So I've kind of closed the door, and a lot of times, you know, because of punches, if this was MMA, because of punches, I might be able to take an arm, or he may continue to roll, and now I've got his back, and like I said, from here, I can go inside. I'm going to be nice to Steve, but I can flatten him out, and then I can start punching him from here, choking him from here. So, yeah, negating the hips and stopping the hips, I almost feel like technical mount maybe is a more dominant position to mount, because I can do more damage.
And I agree. I mean, it's kind of my thought process too, right? Actually, my thought process is basically the same as you. Like you get there, you punish them, do this and that. But if I get to, you know, an angle position, like a technical mount, my chances for submissions against good guys definitely increase. And then I think another thing that you do a great job at teaching is that sometimes I think other people do not, is that you should address self-defense in MMA, right? Like, you know, like there's obviously in jiu-jitsu, we kind of talked about this the other night, there's certain gyms that are straight self-defense in jiu-jitsu, and there's nothing wrong with that. So they're doing essentially kind of what jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu started at, is Gracie jiu-jitsu, where it was basically self-defense and a little bit different. Then over time, once we had competitions, it evolved into a competition art, right? Which is great, right? I think we both like both. And sometimes really as more guys that compete and do the jiu-jitsu that we do, sometimes I think really we overstep our bounds, meaning that we just like disregard the self-defense aspect, right? And the bottom line is, this kind of what I always bring back home, and you're doing the same thing, is that I tell my guys, like, man, if you were here, like Steve, you know, you guys are blue belts, or you guys are here purple belts, or you're this, that, and then you got in a fight and got your ass kicked, like, you probably should just sue me. Like, I don't want somebody to go out and sue us, right? But you just wasted a lot of money, you know, day in and day out of learning all this great jiu-jitsu. And then you got in a street fight and you pulled open guard and the guy punched you in the face and knocked you out on the cement, right? Like, it's not cool. Like, I think we should always bring it back home to a degree, like, rather that you never are going to fight MMA. Your interest is kind of like, you forget about it, but it's not really self-defense. But this is a martial art, right? So even though we're learning competition jiu-jitsu, what's going to work against the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world, the bottom line is, if you need to protect yourself and your family, you better know that there is a difference, right? There's some things that you can't do. I can't have you in my guard and just never address the head posture position where you can punch me and stuff. Like, and I just make sure every now and then to bring that back up, you know, just like you did. Just say, hey, like, you know, even though this is our focus, if I get in a technical mount, I can beat the crap out of you, right? Or if I get in technical mount and a second guy decides he wants to kick me in the face, I can disconnect and get away more than I can if I'm connected to your body and my feet are crossed and mount, and some guy now kicked me in the face. I'm kind of screwed, right? Like, you know, again, even if you don't practice it all the time because you're not a self-defense jiu-jitsu gym, I think it's also disservice if you never mention it. And that's the most you need to do, is mention it. I mean, to kind of drive that home too, like in the history of our gym, my gym in particular, I've had several guys get into street fights. In general, I believe for the right reason. Like, I try to teach guys that aren't starting fights, right? But most of these guys are, for lack of a better term, like nerdy guys, right? So they got kind of picked on, and they end up winning, right? And I didn't have to say, like, for those exact same people, like, hold the head and do that. They just knew, right? And then maybe they got mount and the guy, you know, punched the guy a couple of times. Almost all of them ended up rear naked, right? Because you just get dominant position, and normal people don't know to not turn their back and do stupid stuff. So almost all of them end up choking people out. And really, in particular, one guy got jumped by two guys, you know, and I'm not gonna say he's like a badass, but two guys, he ended up choking them both out, and the police arrived. They're going to arrest him because he's laying there with two guys unconscious. And then everybody's like, no, man, he's the one that got jumped. He just happened to win, you know?
He's just a badass.
Yeah. But it really, those stories always drive it home more for me, and not to discredit those guys, but I view those guys as kind of nerdy, normal looking guys, right? Like, somebody looks at you two or me, I mean, you guys look like you could fight. I mean, you just, you know, I mean, like, those guys, that's why they're getting in fights, because people are screwing with them. They're like, I could take that guy, and they try, and they got their ass kicked. But, you know, whether it's me or not, like, I always try to remember, like, that's the thing. I was saying, like, man, somebody's going to do something, and I would be embarrassed if you lost. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm like, you're part of my gym, and you do jiu-jitsu all the time, and you're a blue belt or purple belt, and this guy don't train, he just beat you up. That's going to embarrass everybody, you know? So anyway, my point is, I think everybody should remember that. You do a really good job, both you guys. Of course, luckily, I think the difference, like, you obviously have Bobcat MMA, so you guys, it's fresh in your head. I always wonder to myself too, if regular Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms kind of disregard that, if they don't do MMA, or they don't do that, if they forget, right? Like, I think we always should just bring it back home to, hey man, like, this is a martial art versus people that might try to kick your butt. You know, you guys don't box. We're not working on striking. So if a guy's throwing punches at you, you better know how to take them down. You better know how to get into position. And, you know, you should, you know, that's the thing, you should. Like, that's the other thing. Sometimes I think on self-defense too, sometimes people are overly, I don't know the best word, but they're just assuming that nobody knows anything. Nowadays, like, you just run into so many people that could have wrestled, right? So they don't know jiu-jitsu, but they know how to be on top. They have a good base, and, you know, they know how to punch it, right? The old MMA fights in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of wrestlers that knew nothing won fights because they just didn't get submitted, right? If, you know, they just stayed on top. So anyway, my point is, I always I like to watch good jiu-jitsu like you're teaching, knowing that you've got all angles covered. And I think people should think about that, even if it's not your general, you know, concern, or you don't think it is. I mean, I just think you need to be able to protect yourself, kind of deal. Does that make sense? Kind of what I'm saying?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. It's definitely, you know, and I think a lot of us, the reason we're doing jiu-jitsu is probably the UFC. So I think, I'm a bit of a, you know, we were talking about it Friday night. I'm a bit of a slight historian when it comes to MMA and knowing a lot of fights. You know, I've watched thousands of fights.
Yeah.
So even though I predominantly do jiu-jitsu, like, it's always in my head that this is for a fight. This isn't for points, you know?
Well, I think that's why you and I have a similar teaching style, and why we're friends, why we get along, is because of that, right? We're a little bit of the older school. I'm a little bit older than you, but the same thing, right? We came up for the same reason, where UFC was style versus style. But because of the UFC, regardless if you do MMA or not, jiu-jitsu is what made you fall in love with the UFC, right? And then from there, you discovered, hey, jiu-jitsu is not necessarily MMA. Jiu-jitsu is different because now they're wearing a gi. And so we're lucky enough. Like, I wonder, you know what I mean? Like, if people that now came about this time, and it's not wrong, if they just, because they have IBJJF and they have Naga and stuff, like, that stuff didn't even exist when I started jiu-jitsu. There's no such thing. Like, there's no Naga. I mean, I can literally remember when all these things were created. You know, like, there's no grappling competitions. It's different. You know what I'm saying? It's just different. So I think it's easier for you and I to have that same general concept, where we still bring it back to traditional values. And then really, like, I'm proud of that in a way, because I come from the Gracie lineage, right? Initially under Hoist. And that's essentially what they say. I mean, if what they say, I have no reason to doubt what they're saying, but they created a self-defense thing. It just so happened that their self-defense art could win the UFC. And then what you got to remember too is, like, that version of what they did was exactly what the early UFC was. Like, people that knew jiu-jitsu versus people that didn't, right? And nowadays, MMA essentially is a sport, right? You go and you learn MMA, which means you're going to learn jiu-jitsu, wrestling, kickboxing, Muay Thai, you know, boxing and stuff like that. There was no MMA before. You just were Taekwondo, and you thought you were the shit, and you fought this guy, and you this, and you thought, you know what I mean? You had to figure it out, you know? But it's interesting. Like I said, I don't know the answer to, I don't know if new guys that are a lot younger than you and I, Gary, teach just straight jiu-jitsu and don't care. But that's always going to be my thing to the bitter end, is to slightly bring it back home. Like, I think, not to get on this on here, but we talked about the other night, like, I'm not straight self-defense. It's like, not a knock on those people, because that's what I'm saying. That's where I come from. But when I started jiu-jitsu because I watched Marcelo Garcia or Pedapano, or, you know what I mean? Like, on and on, all these people. And the jiu-jitsu that they're doing is not self-defense jiu-jitsu. It's competition jiu-jitsu. And that's what makes it so beautiful to me. It's an art that I learned. And so there's nothing wrong with that. That's what I'm saying. I just combine the two enough to where I think I'm, and you too, that we're lucky enough to hit all aspects, and good enough. I mean, quite honestly, like, anybody that's a blue belt and above, you should be able to beat people up, right? You should. And if you don't, you don't. It's not a big deal. A fight's a fight for a reason. You know, not to get down the rabbit hole, but the same thing. I mean, I've gotten in fights once I knew jiu-jitsu, and the thing is, I think all guys in their head, you think you're going to knock somebody out, right? So even though I know all this jiu-jitsu, I don't know if I was a black belt at the time, but, like, I was punching and swinging for the fences. I wasn't doing jiu-jitsu, you know what I'm saying? Until somebody hit me in the face, and then I was like, oh yeah, like the guy can hit back. It's not like my dreams, you know? And then I was like, oh, then I went to the ground, which everything, if I look back to the street fight, compared to what we practice and get ready for and essentially choreograph, that my street fight was not the same. You know, it's like I got down the right path eventually, but if I watched that on film, I'd be pretty embarrassed. You know, I'm like how it all went.
That's something that I try and that I also echo a lot is that, you know, what we're talking about when we train and when it is self-defense type stuff, like this is if it works perfect. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I can't prepare you for the complete unknown of what's going to happen in a fight. I can only prepare you to be in those situations when they occur. It's not guaranteed that a guy is going to try and do this. It's most likely. And so there, you know, it's chaos, and it's chaos for a reason. It wasn't. None of this is scripted when you get into a fight, like you're saying. It's choreographed, right? And I can only give you these are the most regular occurrences, and we can try and plan for everything, but somebody's going to do something that is that unorthodox that nobody planned for. And that's kind of where sometimes the sport grows. That's the, you know, when fighting grows. If you have somebody like a John Jones, if you have somebody like Craig Jones, like they do things that are not the normal thing. And when that happens, those are new tricks that become arsenals.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's the other thing too, is like some guys, not everybody is made for competition, right? Like even throwing the MMA or getting punched in the face aspect out, because that's the easiest one to go to, because if really Mike Tyson's the one that says it, but if it's like everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? But even throwing that out, think of just jiu-jitsu competition. There's some guys that compete and they're great, right? There's other guys, the anxiety and the pressure of competing takes about 50% of your game and throws it out the window, right? Because now maybe for various reasons. One, you just don't think, like in the gym, it's like you just flow, right? Because there's no harsh concept like win or lose doesn't matter. You just do whatever you do. I think in a competition, you know, you get this adrenaline dump, things change. You don't know anything about the opponent. You're a little bit scared. You're afraid to make more, like just be more open with your game, right? You take less chances because you're like, man, I might go for the armbar, then I'll be on my back. I can't do that, right? Like until you get used to competing, and then, you know, that you take more chances, I guess is the point, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, Chad, but I think people need to know that. I've got, you know, good guys at our gym that on the mat, in the practice gym, they're amazing, right? And I've seen them compete and they were not as amazing. And that's fine. That's why I tell, like, instead of just saying like, hey, you need to compete more, sometimes I tell people like, I'll just like, maybe competition is not for you. That's okay, right? Like, you know, like maybe it's too high of anxiety for you. Like, I don't always push the thing like, hey, you need to compete because you learn more. That is 100% true, right? You do. But at the same time, not everybody's body responds well to that kind of stress, right? It just doesn't, you know, and that's fine. Like, that's the thing. Like, I think there's a black belt that I'm good friends with now. His name's Michael Jen. He used to have great DVDs that I studied when I was young. And anyway, like, the knock on him back in the day was he never competed. So he was one of the few people that put out DVDs way back in the early 2000s, but he wasn't like Mario Sperry or Marcelo Garcia. They'd be like, well, who's this guy? He never competed. And like, he made a statement that not everybody that jogs enters a marathon, right? Not everybody that, you know, works out jumps in a competition. And I was like, you know, that makes a lot of sense. Like, he's like, it's just not my thing. It doesn't mean I suck. I'm just not my thing. But anyway, that's how I treat a lot of the guys at the gym. And of course, like I said, now, you know, like that I'm older and injured, and, you know, I don't either. So I'm not going to put pressure on guys to do things that I don't do. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not out there competing every weekend either, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, the other thing too is I think, I think a lot of times when guys compete, and I know after I got to blue belt, I did this too. I thought it meant more than what it actually meant. We get this idea, you know, I've got a patch on my back and I'm representing my team and I don't want to let people down. And so we get it in our head that this is bigger than what it really is. It's hard to remember that when you go to a competition, and let's say that even, it doesn't matter what level you are, whether you're white belt all the way to black belt, but when you go to a competition, you're not being tested against other white belts. You're getting tested against the best white belts at other academies because the trash white belts aren't competing.
Yeah. Well,
So like it's even if you end up doing horrible that day and it's a bad day and you lose all your matches, that was the best white belts against at their schools. You know, same thing for blue belts. There are some guys who might be blue belts that are pretty good blue belts that go to competition and get beat regularly by other blue belts. But that's because they're the best blue belts at the other school.
yeah.
And so it's hard for us to recognize that sometimes. And I think I was having a hard time. Blue belt is one of those things where you have blue belts who are new blue belts that basically are still white belts. And then you have blue belts who are purple belts, basically.
Sometimes higher. Yeah.
And like those sometimes those blue belts can beat brown belts.
Yeah, and that's the other. There's a vast difference in amount of stripes, right? You could be a 1-stripe white belt or no stripe going against a 4-stripe. That guy that keeps getting held back because his academy believes in winning competitions, and you know that it's tough, right? But and that's kind of why, like the same thing. That's why I'm like, just what you're saying is like, it's not what you think, right? There's not as much pressure, but even knowing that, you know, just to go back to myself, like I know all that stuff too, but it doesn't make it any less than what it is for me. Cause I'm one of those guys that that's not how my brain works. You know what I'm saying? Like everything, I'm so competitive that it doesn't matter if I know the cards are stacked against me, I still lost. And that means that I need to go and train every day and I can do this and do that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you know, that's how my brain works. So because of that, I know, like, if I don't have the opportunity to put in the time of somebody that's, you know, 18 that trains 5 days a week and does that, like, I'm not going to say, for me, if I lost, I wouldn't say, well, that's okay, that guy trains 6 days a week. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it's all true. And that's what you should say. I'd be like, it doesn't fucking matter. It's an excuse. I should.
No, yeah. When I lose, it still sucks, even if it's the best guy that I lost to.
Yeah. And I think that's good and bad. I think for you, probably it's a healthy thing. It motivates you and you train better and do that stuff. The difference on my side is that it's an unhealthy obsession. We talked about that a little bit the other night, but it's like, I would take it to the next level where I would start not, you know, my job would suffer, my family would suffer, because that's how obsessive I get, right? So I have to pick, knowing that, and it's not an excuse. Like, I have to know, like, if I'm going to do that, I'm 100% in, whether, you know, win or lose. I'm not, either way, I'm going to be 100% in. That way, for the way my mind works, I have to know when it's all over, I gave everything I had. Because if I lose, I'm not an excuse maker. I don't say all those things I just said. If I lose, I say, well, I lost because I didn't do this. I need to do that. You know, then, and like I said, that's what makes it better for me. That way, if I lost and I did everything, then I can say that guy's just better than me, and that's okay. And I am fine with it. I'm not going to sit at night and sit up and be like, man, I suck. I got to, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's an unhealthy obsession for me. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. It is what it is, you know? But I think that's, and then I want to go back to this one thing real quick. It's kind of backwards, but way back when you're a mount, you mentioned being patient. And I want to bring that up again for a couple of reasons. I meant to bring it up a few times before, but that is one of the key concepts, I think, in jiu-jitsu that's overlooked too. That's another old school thing that's brought up a lot, is be patient, take your time, get on mount. You don't have to hurry, right? But then I think as we get good, sometimes people are like, well, I'm not doing anything. Because I actually had people in my gym say that. One of my black belts, actually, like, I know that's his weakness, right? I have a black belt that's really, really good. Probably one of the best guys we got, but I know his main weakness is not moves. His main weakness is patience. So I know if I wait in a position long enough, he'll get frustrated. He might even have me in a submission. I just know, like, even if I can't breathe, if I hang on long enough, he's so impatient that he'll be like, oh, it's not working, I'm going to move on. Right? Like, and that's what I use against him. So meaning that, you know, that's an important aspect. You're not in a hurry. Like, we can kind of use that back and forth in the self-defense, but even jiu-jitsu, if you're not down on points in a jiu-jitsu match, like, what are you in a hurry for? Like, just chill out, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, right?
It's funny because when I say patience, I don't even mean minutes. Usually it's seconds. So patience, like the guy on bottom, even if it's a 5-minute match, and let's say it takes me 3 minutes to get to mount, by the time I've gotten to mount, once I get them out, 30 seconds feels like an eternity for the guy on bottom.
Yes, yeah.
And usually it's not 30 seconds of him not moving. Usually it's like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so if I can hang out for 10 to 12 seconds, the guy, if we sat for 30 seconds right now in silence, everybody would get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Somebody would start talking. And it's the same thing in a match or even in a fight. And we've seen it in UFC fights, we can see it in jiu-jitsu matches. Like the crowd gets unruly and is tired of waiting if it's been 30 seconds and there's been no action. And so usually somebody will move and make a mistake and then, pay for it. So the patience that I'm talking about usually is about 8 to 12 seconds of patience. And then he feels like, man, I gotta go, I'm dying under here.
Yeah.
So patience it's not even so much like minutes, it's seconds. So when I say patience, I'm just saying like, you just gotta wait a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, even to that point too, I think I've come up with a compromise in my own head where if I'm feeling that, like you said, maybe like we haven't done something for 10 seconds, so my brain starts thinking like I need to do something. I've come up with in my game plan of what I've already do, things that I can occupy that space, but aren't risky. Meaning like if I was mount, I'm not going to just go for a loose arm bar because I'm getting, I'm getting impatient. Like I would more like probably go put my hand in the collar because I know the guy's hands are going to come up. I already know that if I put my hand in the collar, he could try to bridge and roll me. So I'm ready for that. I feel safe in that position. I'm not making unnecessary risks. So I'm still being patient in essence, but the compromise, like I said, is I filled that time up in my head where I am doing something, right? Like it kind of keeps them.
Yeah, and you're right, because I want to be progressing, right? I want to be moving towards a finish. I want to be moving towards an end of the match. And so just like if I was in, and like you're saying, it could be like from mount, but a lot of times I'll be in side control. And if I'm in side control and Steve's done a really good job of framing and I'm doing what I can to stop him from tripping, maybe I'm doing a good job of cross-facing here, but I feel like we've kind of stalemated at this point. There's, rather than like trying to go crazy and jump up to knee on belly when he's, I know he's I don't want to try and jump in and make too much space and then he's got his knee back in. So I will do things like you were saying, like hand in the collar from mount, but also if I'm in side control to make a progression like, okay, well, I'm going to switch to north-south or a different kind of side control. That way maybe I can start to open up his arms or move towards something to a finish. So it's the same thing, whether I'm in mount and I can't get anything to happen, so I put a hand in the collar, side control, going from side control to north-south to see if I can open up something there. So yeah, if it's been 8 to 10 seconds and the guy doesn't respond, and when I say respond, I'm looking for him to make a mistake that I can capitalize on. If he hasn't done that, then I'm gonna move somewhere else and wait for him to make a mistake there. So it's the same thing. If I put the hand in the collar, hands come up, well now maybe I can move to that S mount, or maybe I can take the arm from an arm bar position or something like that. And it's a progression towards an end.
And hopefully, like by doing all this stuff, that's what the key takeaways to all this stuff is the same thing. These concepts, right? Like we all feel the same things, and here's your game plan and how you take care of those things, right? Like being patient but still moving position. And I think that's, again, like I said it a few times, but I think that's why we get along. We have a similar thought process, right? And you're a good one in particular, really, because I think, which is rare, is you still have an old school mind frame adapted to the new style. And what I mean by that is that, let's say the old style Gracies, they were fine rolling for 2 hours, right? The concept was kind of patience over the top, right? Like I can sit here for an hour and get my ass kicked. He just has to make one mistake and I have to catch it, and essentially that's what they did. That's why the old Gracies didn't adapt, right? Because that's the style that they trained for. Is they needed no time limit. They needed to have a Dan Severn beat on you for 15 minutes and then get them in a triangle, right? You didn't do anything for 15 minutes. If we look at it now, and that's the old, like that literally, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's like an effective self-defense style. Nowadays, there's MMA, right? That was, again, like you said earlier, that wasn't a thing, right? So now we're in a little bit like you still have the great concept, and even by that, I mean, one of the old school techniques, or not techniques, but concept was you should always be progressing your position, right? Meaning that,
I've heard a lot of the graces, and some people have said that it's attributed to Helson or the Hickson, but like you go from 0 to 1, and then from 1 to 0, and once you get to 1, you don't go back to 0, and 1 goes to 2, and 2 never goes back to 1. It's always moving forward, and I always took that, like I understand what they were saying is movement progression. The other thing that I took from that is, I think it's safe to say that everybody has a style. Marcelo, had a style where it was arm drag, dummy sweep, get to the back and choke you. I think I also take that to use, like, make your style. Once you decide what your style is, make your style so good that you can do that jiu-jitsu against everybody.
yeah,
And so it's effective against, because body, and we talked about this too, is like body types kind of dictate what kind of jiu-jitsu you can do. Mm-hmm. If you're, a big muscle-bound guy, and it's not impossible for you to invert. It's not impossible for you to do Imanari rolls and stuff like that. But it's not likely for your body type to be good at that. Mm-hmm. And so you have to use your body type at its best potential. And for me, because I'm a big guy, because I'm fairly strong, the smash pass, if I can get on top, I can make that work against most people. Now, I've done a lot of work from the bottom as of recent because I've gotten pretty good at smash pass, and I like to try and find my way back to the top. And so that's the part of my game that I really need to work on. I also need to work on my leg lock game. But in competition, my smash pass should be so good that I do that to everybody. It doesn't matter who I face, I do that because that's my style. And I implement, it's just like a game plan in boxing, a game plan in MMA. Like, everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the face. Well, I want to punch you first, right? And if I can punch you first and put you in my game, we're playing by my rules and not your rules. So once you do start to, and I think usually it's probably, I think Steve's getting there now. It's probably around purple belt that I see most people really start to find their niche, and that's where they run. They know where they're good at. And once you learn that, make that solid, make that your game, and make that, don't be afraid to learn more. Don't be afraid to add more weapons, but know who you are. And for me, that changed. I was getting towards the end of the blue belt, getting into purple belt, and I discovered, this is who I am in jiu-jitsu. Because I'm a 205-pound guy when I compete, because I'm fairly strong, and I've got, I'm only a 5'11", so I've got a lot of weight and a small frame. Smash pass is perfect for me. And so once I discovered that, I learned, hey, if I can, all I have to do is end up in guard on top. And from there, I can win. Yeah. It's when I'm on the bottom that I'm having trouble. So don't go to the bottom, end up on top, and make that my game. As long as I can make that my game, I feel like I can win.
Well, yeah, and then the other thing is, through trial and error, you figured out what worked for you. Sometimes too, I think just because somebody thinks they're something doesn't mean they are something, right? Like, you still could be wrong, but anyway, the point, you trial and error, you figured out, you knew your game plan. And that is, I'm glad you brought it up, because that's actually, I was going to ask Steve the same thing, but this is about the time. And I mentioned in my gym all the time too, is I don't want people to be a cookie cutter of me. Right. And it's not because I think I'm great or anything like that. It's just you're not me. Right. That's why when we watch, MMA or jiu-jitsu, some could be a guillotine. We all know a guillotine, but why is this guy hitting them everywhere he goes, right? Or like you said, Marcelo Garcia, we all know arm drags, right? But why is he hitting them everywhere he goes? It's that's because that's his game. And I've tried that game and it just doesn't fit the rest of my game. Maybe I can do that move, but it doesn't lead me into the certain thing. If that fails, my step 2 and 3 aren't at that, that level or matching that game. So I think that was what makes you a good instructor, which is good, because I think sometimes when I look at gyms, everybody's the same. I can say, hey, you're going against a guy from this gym, this is what they're going to do, and then I'm right. That shouldn't be the same thing. You could be you're going against somebody from Garry's gym or Butch's gym, you'll know that they're good, but you don't, like, their game could be anything, right? Like, like maybe Steve doesn't smash pass like you do. Maybe he does in general, but maybe he does something different, right? And that's okay. Like, what I mean? Like, I think as long as, and that's why we've been pushing this whole time, the concepts. That's the one thing that does need to match, because those things typically don't change. If you're doing like arm bars from everywhere, but your concepts are still the same and you're not getting swept and stuff, then we're all on the same solid jiu-jitsu playing field, right? And that's the most important thing. So that's good. Speaking of, like, Steve, do you know what your game is? Not to put you on the spot. It's a tough one, right? Like, yeah.
I think I'm still trying to discover it. I think I used to think that I was a guard player, and now I'm trying to get more. I think I rely too much on it and go to it too much. I'm trying to get out of that.
Yeah, and it's good, because, like, if somebody asks me the same question, I have a general ideal, just like Garry does, right, at our level of brown and black belt and stuff. But I kind of don't, right, at the same time, because it's like, it changes, right? Like, I remember, like, up until purple belt, I used closed guard essentially nonstop, because that was the Gracie way, like hand in the collar. And I was a purple belt. I was good. Then all of a sudden I discovered, hey, a bunch of other people can pass a certain way, and I'm not in closed guard. And if they put their knee up, I can't just get, sliced past all the time. So then I learned De La Hiva and did all this. Like, I didn't have a good, like, I remember even being at like brown belt and not having a good half guard. I just didn't need it. I had enough to regard. And I, like, looking back at certain levels of certain guards that I had, like, some of them were pathetic, but I was good enough to stay out of those things, or good enough to use them in a way that it got me to the places that I was good at. Right. And now maybe, like, I have an awesome, this version of the game, right? So then it confuses me, because, like, now I'm always, instead of being a full guard, a closed guard, I'm always in half guard and butterfly. I'm doing different stuff. Arguably, and maybe I should be better, right? But it's like, I can't throw that away. It's just hard, because I wouldn't say, wouldn't knock closed guard game, because Hodger Gracie is the best in the world and uses that old school kind of game, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just like, I'm not there anymore, but I still feel like that's my game. It would be my game. Like, if push come to shove, like we're saying, like, if I was afraid some guy was going to kill me and I'm in a, life or death situation, probably would go back to what I used to do way back in the day. Just what your brain does, So anyway, that's interesting. I mean, and it's cool. Like, again, too, and props to you, Garry, for giving people the freedom. I mean, it sounds simple for you and I, right? Because we do, and you don't think about it probably. But just so you guys know, like Steve too, there's a lot of gyms that don't give you that freedom, right? It's like, it's A to B. Like, even like us at Marcelo, we have a curriculum, right? But nobody's expecting you to do that game. Like, you just need to know it, because you need to address it. That was current jiu-jitsu at the point that curriculum was put out. That's what everybody in the IBJJF was doing and stuff. You needed to address it. Things have changed, like, the curriculum's still good, but I mean, there's 50-50 guard and, blah, blah, all this other stuff that wasn't addressed at the time. So, like, it's just jiu-jitsu. Things evolve and things change, right? And so does our knowledge and curriculum, so it doesn't mean, like, our base of DVDs where Marcelo's taught us there is not right. It's still the right. But it's just like we're saying here, everybody's got a different pathway. So I'm going to teach you the general and then the concepts, and then whatever your game is in your pathway, by all means, do that thing,
Yeah.
So let's get, I'm looking to see if I had any other questions here real quick. Is there anything other than, I think I've asked you everything, because what I'm doing here too, by the way, so you know, is I'm writing stuff down as you do stuff, so I can make sure that I remember to ask you. Do you got, I mean, that's perfect. Like, do you have any other things that you want to add or anything?
I mean, we could obviously we could go on forever. The one thing that I do want to talk about, is that side smash position.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself getting there without even having, if I get to side control, maybe I got a takedown, it was a double leg takedown, and I cleared the legs on the landing, and I ended up in side control. I've gotten to the point now where even if we land here, that I still feel that I can go ahead and use the walk of my legs to end up in side smash position. So if I go off of that concept of trying to push his leg past and squash his other leg, I just walk my hips. So like I said, I stay here. Maybe he's trying to keep his elbows tight. He's not letting me get underneath his elbow, because ideally, if I can, I want to clear this elbow and get behind it so I can start attacking the other arm or whatnot. And he's doing a good job of keeping his frames rather than try and fight that all day. And this kind of goes back to that patience thing. If patience doesn't work, then I move. You know, I can either go north-south or I can walk because, you know, he's doing a good job. I just start walking my hips back the other way and walk from side control over into this side smash. And I just did it all with my hips. So I didn't have to turn. I'm using the same principles of trying to cover his leg, his bottom leg with his top leg, right? I was already chest to chest. So as he's on his back, I'm already chest to chest. His legs are getting walked this way. Now, the smart thing for him to do is to pull his knee up and try and move back out. But then he's going to, if he does that as I'm coming around, he's giving me opportunities, right? So if we're here, and it's just being always opportunistic, you know, always looking for opportunities in his movements to try and progress. So as we're going here, if he tries to bring that knee, he's bringing that knee up. Now I know that it's safe to go knee on belly because he's pulling this knee out of the way. He's not using this as a tool to shrimp. He's using this as a tool to recover his hips, right? Because his hips are getting pushed here. And it goes back to that two-step process, 1 and then 2. So I know it's safe if I'm able So I know that if I start to move the hips this way and he starts to bring that knee in, then I can go knee on belly. It should be safe at that point to go knee on belly because the two-step process says he's not going to be able to beat me. I'm racing him to that door. So now I'm getting, if it's a match, that's 2 points, right? Yeah. Good chance for me to progress to mount too from knee on belly. So I like being opportunistic, and it's still coming off of that same principle of collapsing those legs on top of each other.
Well, the way I've simplified it in my brain is you've created a delay, meaning that by turning his hips away and getting to what you're saying, the two-step process, that delay allows you enough time to switch your position, right? Because again, you know, it's like, depends on how you're terming it, but like a two-step process to me means a delay because now as he puts his foot down to drive his hips the other way, that's your tail sign that he's going to try to put the knee in. So you went to whatever, case of Gatami, north, south, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I guess, you know, there's a lot of different, delay is a perfect word for it, but there's a lot of different ways to think about it. But what I'm really saying is, like, from here, he can shrimp that away pretty easy. He's going to bridge and shrimp, right? Mm-hmm. If he's here, he can't bridge to shrimp. He needs to recover and then shrimp. So that, like that two-step, there's a delay, and my motion doesn't change. My motion is still one step. So from here, we both have one step. If I try and, you know, I've got a stance, but if I try and pop up, see, the one step makes it possible for him to bridge a little bit and pop out. If his legs are over, I still only have one step. He has the second step of getting up. So even without his pants, I'm here. I beat him because I only had one movement to make, and he had two. So you said it's a delay. He's delayed in the necessary movement because of smashing his hips to the side.
Yeah, no, I think that's an awesome concept. I mean, really, honestly, just you doing it too and me watching, I like it a lot. I don't do that. But then when like I said, that's how I'm thinking of it. I was like, that delay is so big for you, you know, I mean, that you have so many more options safely, which is awesome. Like we all do something similar. You know, mine's a little bit different. I've got the knee and the hip so that I can feel when they move away. So that's kind of my delay, but my delay is not as big as yours. You know, if I'm looking at it in my head, but also at the same time too, kind of like we were talking about earlier, I've kind of built a game plan around that version of what I do. It's like, I know that there's not a big of delay, so maybe I can't do the certain things that you're doing. Maybe I wouldn't go knee on belly because he might beat me with his knee in, so I go more north south or what, you know what I mean? Like I still have a proper ends to the means where I'm not getting regarded or whatever, you know. But I think that's awesome. I mean, that's actually more big guy style than what I use, which is weird because I'm a big guy. So I like it. That's awesome, man. You know.
Yeah, I've always tried to I always think about it. I'm a big guy, right? So if I was going to win the race, I need a head start.
Yeah.
And this is my head start. You got to give me 20 yards for this to be a fair race, right? And so if I'm going to have any chance of winning it, I need the head start. The head start in this is having his hips across. Same thing, you know, I'm always looking for ways to give myself a head start. Maybe that's the way I should start thinking about it. But you know, like if I want this far side arm and I know I need to get it, well, I'm going to use pressure. I need to get this elbow free because his shrimp, you know, part of his shrimp comes from this elbow. So if I can make him suffer a little bit and he's going to pull on the shoulder, now I've isolated this. Well, now it's a two-step process, right? If he wants to recover guard, he's got to first get his elbow inside, that's step one, and then shrimp. So in the process of him trying to get his elbow back, that's going to lead me to my next thing. Like if I stay tight, you know, the top. So if I stay tight here and he wants to get his elbow back in, maybe he's going to reach for the sky and try and drag it underneath, and then I can step over top of him, right? And so now I've created a new dilemma because now I can go to my far side armbar. And all of these things are just like little ways for me to have a head start in the race. And I'm constantly looking for ways to slow his escapes down or even his attacks down. That way I have a head start in getting out or moving forward.
And I would say too, like props to you. That's like, again, sounds like we should be in a relationship or something. Like, but like, I really like the way that you think of things. Like, you know, I think that's a smart way to thinking of things. And the difference is like, sometimes I think very similar to you, but sometimes I take for granted that everybody, their mind works like my mind. Right. And so what you said, quite frankly, was like coming up with shortcuts because you're a big guy, or coming up with these things, or trying to win the race. Right. And to kind of like the same thing, like a metaphor, that's what I try to teach my kids. Like I was good at basketball. Right. But I was still a big guy. So the difference was, like if I was, and I'm, you know, a tall guy, big guy. So that means that somebody has to pass me the ball, right? Essentially. So I had to get down to the court, get into low post position to get the ball. So what I figured out, which seems common sense, but other people can't figure out, is that if I wasn't the first one down the court, I wasn't going to get the ball because the guards were way ahead of me and the play was already going on. By the time I got there, it's like, if I was lucky, I'd get a rebound, right? So then I just, you know, figured out certain ways that if a shot was a certain spot and I couldn't get a rebound, then I took off sprint down the court so that I could get my position first, right? So it's a little shortcut that made up for my deficits, right? And so that's kind of the way I teach my kids. Like, same thing, my 13-year-old plays basketball. He's not the fastest guy in the world, you know, same thing. But like, here's what you got to do is the same what I'm saying. You got to get down the court first. You got to create angles. You're not going to out sprint somebody. Come at an angle. You're going to do this and do that. Find tricks that you can do. And that's what you're doing in jiu-jitsu. Which so I give mad props to because it's exactly what I do. But I think that's the other thing sometimes, which is a great concept, is that we take for granted that everybody thinks that way, but they don't, right? Because we have some good athletes that they don't realize why they're in the position they're in. Like, because 50-50, they're either fast enough or they're not, right? Where in general, as a big guy too, a lot of times you're working from a deficit. Like, we can't do certain things. We have to come up with more creative ways to get in a position a little bit faster because speed's not the answer, you know?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is important too is like we talk about it, and we kind of talked about this Friday night as well. We talk about jiu-jitsu as like big guy versus big guy versus small guy. We can always be on both sides of it too. We're not always, you know, being a big guy doing big guy jiu-jitsu works out because I'm a big guy, but I'm not always the biggest guy. You know, and there are times where I have to do, and that's why I think it's also important to learn little guy moves, 100%. Learn inversions, learn how the ways that they recover guard, because there are going to be occasions where I'm in an absolute division, or maybe, you know, if I compete, you know, as I move up in belt rank and I compete, they roll a lot of, you know, it used to be there weren't any brown belt and black belt matches when you would go to small competitions, but now like they just roll it into the black belt division. Or if you go to an IBJJF, there'll be a division for everybody, but some of the smaller competitions will have like just an absolute brown belt. And when that happens, I might be going up against somebody who's 280. Yeah. And if that's the case, all my big guy jiu-jitsu is out the door because I'm not bigger than him. I'm not going to be able to wrestle him the same way I can wrestle somebody my own size. And so I start to try and adapt some of the small guy jiu-jitsu that I learned. And so it's important to learn not just my steps in all these shortcuts, but it's also important to learn the races that the little guys can use, because one day I might need some of that tactic.
Well, no, that's a good point. All right. Anyway, so going back to what we were saying, and then we'll finish this off, is the kind of what we were talking about when it crapped out on us again, is it adapting our game. And that just means my thought process, and Garry, you might have a different thought process, is that in general, and I don't know if I'm sure I didn't come up with this, but it was one of the things I thought that I should know at least 2 moves from everything. And that doesn't mean that's all, but I just mean like if one move fails, and then I've got another move. So usually 3, I like to have ABC, but that includes positions that I don't go to often, right? Because it's not part of my game. And that kind of goes back to what we are. If you and I roll and you're able to be the one that puts me in your game, so that means now I'm doing a game that's not mine. If I don't have 2 or 3 moves, then that's a disservice to jiu-jitsu, right? Like I need to know stuff, and it still happens. So people put you in new guards that you don't really know, and blah blah blah. But the point is, that's how I go back and go like, oh, man, I need to learn that. I didn't know that, and this guy destroyed me from there, right? So, I mean, what is your thought process on like mastering your game, especially when Steve's gone now, but he's learning his game, and I think you do as a blue or purple. Still there's going to be days that you have to adapt, right? So do you think
So and I kind of talked about this working with the OU MMA club. I get a lot of wrestlers, and it's going to be really hard to teach somebody to be a guard player if they came up and they've got 8 years of wrestling. It's going to be really hard to teach a big guy how to berimbolo and do stuff from open guard as smoothly as somebody who's a smaller guy. Like, sometimes we say like nerdier guys, but like those guys have the right body type to do that. So I wouldn't expect a wrestler to make that his dominant part of the game. But like you said, it's definitely about having options from there. And I always tell them if you know what your game is, find a way to get there. Right? If I'm stuck on my back, how do I get back to my game? So this kind of goes back to talking about pathways, and I always call them, for my guys, I call them pathways to success. If my success usually happens, if I have higher percentage submissions, if I have higher percentage finishes in certain spots, how do I funnel everything back to that way? Sometimes I may only need 2 or 3 moves from K-guard or 2 or 3 moves from De La Hiva to find my way back. I'm a guard player. I'm just looking for a way to get back to my guard so I can start setting my grips and chokes. If I'm a wrestler, maybe I don't want to play deep half a lot, which is kind of my position. Is like I don't want to go into a lot of deep half stuff. I try and use some sweeps. But really what I look for is a way to wrestle back to the top. I want to get to that smash. That's my game. And so how do I find the pathway back to where I'm comfortable? If I can get the game, if I can get the fight back to where I'm comfortable, I have a higher percentage of winning there because that's where I'm comfortable.
And I think in a way, you and I, not to give us overly credit, but we're an anomaly to a certain degree, meaning that we are big guys, right? But you just said you like to play deep half or guard, right? So that's not always the case, which is why you're a good teacher and a good competitor, right? But the reason I'm mentioning it is I think, there can always be confusion. Like when we talk about having a game plan, your game plan really is to be on top and smash, right? But as jiu-jitsu players, we know that that's not the case. You should always get ready for the worst case, which is why usually I explain to new people why we do guard so much. It doesn't mean that I'm going to jump to my back in a street fight and say, jump, get in between my legs, right? But I prepare so much for that because what if I slip? What if he hits me? I'm going to be on my back. If I'm totally ready and comfortable there, it's just like any other position. Like you're going to do better the more you study and the more you prepare yourself. If we're going back to, once you get nervous and everything goes out the window and your brain's not functioning right, that's why I want to prepare. I want it to be muscle memory, right? And I want to be able to survive on my back and with a big guy. but it still doesn't mean that that's not my game in essence, right? I wouldn't consider you a deep half player, right? In general, I mean, if I'm just being generic and labeling you, and same with me, right? I'm in that weird body type where I'm long and lanky, other than being a big guy, so I can invert and do all this weird stuff. But I don't ever say that I am a little guy. I just know like I can throw that stuff on, and I do, and that usually gives big guys a hard time because I throw that out of nowhere. But it's just like, at the same time, I guess my point is like I realize I would never say that's my game. I'm lucky to have that in my toolbox, right? And that's the best thing we can do as teachers, I think. I mean, you're a really good teacher, like we said earlier, like that we're not making people cookie cutters or whatever we think jiu-jitsu should be. That speaks volumes too. That's hard. You know, I mean, like I said, I'm not just giving you credit because you're on here. To me, that's the best teacher instructor is a guy that can properly convey that and they believe that. Because the difference, you know, that's my knock on some other things when I call them traditional. Even a lot of times karate, right? You have a certain curriculum or kata that you have to, you know, everybody's the same. It's just, especially in stand-ups, there's just not, it's not the real world. Like so many things could happen. You've got to have answers to those things, right? So again, like it's proper, you know, props to you for adapting and teaching your guys to adapt and, you know, doing all those things, right? And one thing to finish this up to, a long time ago, which I guess is a thing again now too, and it's not a good or bad thing, but I don't know, like Lloyd Irvin's not in the press as much as he used to be, I guess. He was a big thing. I mean, you know who I'm talking about, right? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Keenan came out of there, so yeah.
Yeah, when Keenan, Ryan Hall, right? There's a time that he had everybody. He's a great coach, a great and really great marketer, good guy from what I gather. I mean, you know, whatever. But anyway, the reason I bring his name up and some stuff is years ago, he came up with something called the grappling game plan. And I'm going to oversimplify it because I think the reason I bring it up again is because it's a thing again now. I've seen some ads where he's talking about it. I spent all this money and bought the great grappling game plan, right? Because I think Lloyd and a bunch of his guys were like some of the first Americans to get their black belts in 3 years, you know.
Yeah.
There's caveats to that story because Lloyd was like a killer judo guy too, right? And a good athlete. But anyway, you know, he was promoting some of his guys. Like, I think really, to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons IBJJF came up with these time limit rules is because he was having these guys like get to black belt and brown belt so fast. But the difference was when they go to competition, they'd win. So like even all these people talk trash and then they go to competition and win. Like you mentioned Keenan and all these other guys. But anyway, to bring that all home is that he made the grappling game plan. All that literally was a notebook, and it said like, here's my game plan if the guy's in butterfly. Here's my game plan if the guy's in that. So like literally to me, and maybe I missed it. I was like so at the time so disappointed because I had it like built up in my head that this was like in 3 years I'll be a black belt. Whatever this secret recipe is, I've got it, you know. And then it was just literally what we've said earlier. It's like taking notes and kind of doing what we're doing, like deciding what your game plan is, you know, your game is, coming up with a plan and doing those things. It's literally what we're talking about. The difference was I paid $300 some for a notebook for that stuff. And again, I'm not talking trash because I literally paid no attention. Once I saw there was a notebook, I just like shut it down. So it may have been a great system for all I know, you know, it just was like, damn. But the reason I bring it up is because that is the secret, right? Like you said, like go into seminars, taking notes, go in, you know, I don't do it either. And I don't know how much you did it, but if you took notes after every class, you know, more so than just trying to remember and like this sweep didn't work. Why didn't it work? And you broke down your notes and you're like, oh, you're like, I missed this detail, right? You're going to be a better grappler, better teacher, better everything, you know?
You know, kind of piggybacking on that, like maybe I didn't take notes after a class, but it's really hard to say like, why won't this move work for me in a drill? But it's like when you're trying stuff live, that's when I really want to find out what works and doesn't work when I'm really rolling. And if I have something that's like a surprise to me, somebody used a new move and hey, what was that move? I don't necessarily ask them, hey, how do you do that or whatever, but I will go home and I research that on my own because and this is kind of where like losing sucks and we're all there to get better and we want to make everybody better when we go to jiu-jitsu. So when we're on the mat, I hope that somebody is learning something about their game when they roll with me. And I should be trying to find something about my game when I roll with them, but we still want to win. We still want to win. It feels good to be the better guy. And if somebody catches me with something that I'm oblivious to, and it's not just like, damn, he's just better than me, and I knew what he was doing, I go home. It bugs me, and I go home and I look it up, and then I'm like, okay. I remember the first time I ever got submitted in competition was a north-south chip. It was just something that I hadn't reached in the curriculum and we hadn't really touched upon. And I had a good guard game at the time, and I was pretty good at wrestling already. So it was something that was a surprise to me. I remember I went home and I learned there was like 7 different escapes from north-south. And if somebody goes for the north-south choke to do this, or somebody does this, to do this. And so I tried to learn them all. I took notes, and then I came back to open mat, and I was like, hey, before we roll, can I work all of these? Let me drill these before we roll. And I think if people did that, and not to say that my way is the way to do it, because it's not, but if more people did that, I think that had a little more dedication to focusing on some of their weaknesses rather than just trying to focus on what they're good at. They would progress a lot quicker. And not only that, but they would find out that maybe there's more of a game for them available than what they thought.
Well, yeah, that's a tough thing to do. I mean, speaking even of Lloyd Irvin, that was one of the things I do remember in that thing that he talked about, and he even talked about, I don't want to give it, if this is still what he's selling, I don't want to give some stuff away, but I think this one's okay. But he just talked about, he like framed things that like, I know how to ask people to roll with you. Like he's like, if a guy kicks your ass all the time in a certain position, a way to ask that person to roll so they can help you, right? Like, you can say, hey man, like you're really good at open guard. You're probably going to kick my ass. Do you mind if I roll with you? And you kind of do that, and then we'll, when it's over, I'll at least know what's going on, or something. Then people are like, you're disarming people. Plus, you've taken the pressure off yourself, right? Like, because that's ultimately, like you said, we do want to win, right? And some people still, even though they have the right concept in their head, they can't get rid of the ego aspect at the end. So that helps you with the ego aspect, because if you now, instead of being the douchebag that coaches somebody, all right, like they got you in an arm bar and you're like, oh, hold on, like you could do this a little bit better, which we all know, roll with people that did that. You're not doing that no more. You've already told the guy, like, hey, you're great in this position. I'm putting myself in the spot that you're the best at. You're probably going to beat me. We're all okay with that. You're going to teach me, right? Now it's a disarming situation, and again, hopefully I didn't give away, so like whatever, but that's it is common sense in a way, right? You should know that, but it is, because I did the same, like when I was learning, I got lucky, and much like you, because I didn't have, like when I came up, right, there wasn't all these black belts, and there really wasn't a lot of people sharing knowledge, right? There just wasn't. It was like the Gracies, they had their thing and everybody else was doing their thing, but it was all secret because everybody wanted to beat each other. I did some of the things right at the right time on accident, and they worked out, meaning that like I was like, I hate being in side body. So like every time I started for like a year, maybe 2 years, everybody started in side body on me, to the point where I didn't fear side body anymore, right? I had enough escapes and plus it did the same thing. It disarmed everybody. I'm like, well, you're starting in the most dominant position, plus the position I'm terrible at. If you beat me, you're supposed to. I've already told you I'm terrible. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a roundabout used the same way, and still got to learn, But and that's kind of the point of this, all this stuff, it's like you and I've got lucky, and we've learned some stuff from other people that I think will benefit some other people that are just starting, right? And that's our job right now, is just to help people find the clearest path, right? And it's not that simple. Like, that's the thing, like, too, not to keep going, but what makes you good is another thing that I think sometimes people like us take for granted, is that not everybody leaves the gym when they got beat and actually worries about it. And it's hard for people that do to think, why don't they, right? They just don't, right? But I'm that same way. Like, even if it's like not even that substantial, meaning that I had a great sweep and it didn't work, like it's still, because I'm like, I did everything right. Like, how did that not work? And then we used to joke about it in the gym, because I called it in the shower move, because that's where finally like would be in the shower, no distractions, washing my hair, some goofy thing. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, like I'd skip this step because I've gotten away with it for so long. And this guy finally exploited that step that I skipped. That's why you should have that step, right? And then I'd be like, then I'd come back and say, this is the Butch in the shower move or something, you know, we joke about it. But that's one thing. And to that credit, I think not everybody needs to do that. But I think what people need to do is just realize sometimes too, if you're not getting really good fast, like, are you doing those things, right? Like, are you going back and studying where somebody kicked your butt? Or are you just knowing that Garry kicked my butt here, I'm going to try again tomorrow? Like, it's okay too. It's just, it's going to take you longer, right?
Yeah, well, and that just comes back to time in and product out. You know, if you're thinking about it more, if you go home and study stuff, if you keep a notebook, you know, I've got all of my curriculum is noted. So if somebody wanted, they could just follow through the notes of my curriculum and think about it when they're not on the mat. But even if not, like just the act of writing down a move. Like if you like, when I wrote out my curriculum, I thought about how I wanted to explain each move. So if it's an arm bar, how do I want to explain it? The act of writing it out made me better at it because I really, to put it into words and not have any ability to show with my body how to do something, like I really have to think about what makes that move important. And so sometimes writing it out is even, for me, and this kind of goes along with, you know, anybody who's an educator, like different learning styles, right? Some kids are tactile learners, some kids are auditory learners, some kids, you know, they're really good if they see things written out. So that's, you know, part of us being teachers, I think sometimes is recognizing how someone learns as well. But for me, like learning, a lot of times it's just a matter of writing stuff down. And if I write it out on pen and paper, I really have to think about what makes the move important. I didn't realize how important it was for my hips to catch the shoulder on an arm bar. Or, you know, like how important it was that if I was trying to do an Americana or a key lock, that my elbow should really be wedged inside the neck. And then why is that important? And when you have to start justifying all those things, you recognize it while you roll, and then it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, and that's all. Everybody that became an instructor at our gym has said the same. You know, like when guys that taught the kids class or whatever it is, that's eventually they'd come to that conclusion that we come to because we teach, but it would be the same. That once I started teaching, I got way better because I really had to break down the move, which we all take for granted because they just, you know, somebody says, here's the move, you do the X, Y, Z, right? You do that. So you can make the move successful, but you've never really broke it down to a concept form in your head. Like, okay, you know, I mean, I'm setting the guy up this way. All these things are happening, things that you can, like you do, but you don't think of, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think too, but that's my biggest weakness is that I roll on autopilot a lot. And that's what I tell people. I'm not a good teacher. If, like, for example, if I taught a private and somebody comes in, I said, I just want to roll. And at the end they say, what do I need to work on? That is not my strong point. It's just not, you know what I mean? Like, because like, and it happens to me all the time. People say, man, that was a really cool move. What'd you do? Well, I just reacted off the situation, right? I just, you know, if it's not a move I do, maybe it works all the time. And I've run into that too, like where I have a specific game against a specific person. But until like somebody's actually asked me, I have no earth. I might do it every time and then ask me, I'm like, I have no idea what I do. I have no clue, like, which is sad, you know, but it helps if I have to break it down.
Yeah, I as an instructor to instructor, like I've made a habit of like keeping a whiteboard around or something that I can write stuff down. And if something happens in the middle of a roll that like, okay, Steve keeps doing this, or you know, Brett is doing this, and this is a regular movement that they're making a mistake, or this is why it's failing, I will go run to the whiteboard and I'll write it down on the whiteboard and then be like, Steve, we need to talk about the whiteboard afterwards, or that way, because I in the middle of an open mat or in the middle of a class setting where we're training or whatever, I will forget about it. You know, it's going to be 20 minutes until the end of class when I can dedicate that time to him. And so I've found a way to like, okay, it's my rest period. I need to write down that, you know, John he's doing this with his hips on his hip escape, and that's why it's failing all the time. He's doing, break down the little mistake, and then we can cover that. That way I don't forget about it. That's just something I've done to try and like hopefully help my guys a little more and be a better instructor as far as that goes.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, that's one of the things that I'll be honest, I don't, right? And so like, hopefully, I think I'm on the better side, or maybe 75% of the time I'm lucky enough to remember. But I also know, I'm fully aware that I'm like, there's 25% of the time I don't, right? So it's like in essence, you're gypping people, right? But then one of the reasons too, like just as an instructor, like, which the way you're doing it's perfect because you can address it right there and then. A long time ago, I just ran it. I used to make classes to where I just know, I'd know obviously who all comes to the class, who comes to the gym. So I'd be like, yeah, Monday, I'm going to do this move for Rick, and this will really work out for Joe, and this is going to work out for this guy. And then Monday comes, and maybe those three didn't show up. And then just threw everything out the window. Plus, I was pissed because they didn't show up. You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
Whatever. So I'm lucky enough to where because I do think there's value in writing stuff down ahead of time and having stuff, but I'm lucky enough to where that is my strong point. Like I could literally walk into a room with zero on my head and come up with those are usually my best classes. People are like, man, today was great. I had zero idea what I was going to do, but I came to that over time because my like, that's actually how my mind works. As I cater the lesson to who's there. But again, not knowing who's going to be there wasn't working. But I have an ability to show up and see who's there and say, okay, this is what we need to do today. You know what I mean? Not everybody has that, so I get it. So I also know that I'm lucky.
That's definitely not me. And it's funny because like I'm usually a shoot from the hip kind of guy in just conversation or in talking. I'm usually pretty good at shooting from the hip. But when it comes to class, like I need to know what I'm teaching today, or because I really want to think about it. If I don't have my head in that space, then it's hard for me to do. So I envy you for that because I don't have that shoot from the hip. Like, okay, this is what we're doing today.
Yeah, no, and I think the way you're doing it actually is the right way. Like I realized too, it suits. It's another one of those things that's like my game. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I don't expect people to do the other way. You know what I mean? Because it's just lucky. But hold on, but anyway, we'll end up staying on here all day if we keep talking. I think we're other than the breaks of on and off, it's been about 3 hours, right? So do you think?
Apologies for technical problems.
Oh, it's okay. Hopefully I put it together correctly. That's what I'm starting to worry about, but we'll see. Any other thing? I think that was beautiful, really, obviously, because we both did it right, as a joke. But what, anything you want to add, which is another hard question at the end, anything you think we missed or anything, that you want to add to?
I mean, as far as that position goes, and in that, that side smash, that getting to headquarters, the big things, the big takeaways are, the kind of the things that you would point out when you do stand up. The reason we hold the sleeve is because I don't want him to hook my leg, and that's the reason I stand up to the same side as the sleeve first. Always concentrating on not being swept. So keeping my base and my hips below my head are going to go a long way. It's not the only thing. I can still be swept, but it's going to go a long way and stop me from being swept. When I'm passing, using my head and using my head to stop them from coming up to the elbow. Bigger, stronger guys are going to be able to do that setup, and so if I use my head, I can stop that momentum of them coming up and creating an extra wedge for them to have to come through. If I go into the side smash position or the turning my hips, I'm creating a block. That way their hips only have one way to move, and pushing and smashing the hips down. And then, always trying, like I said, my big guy jiu-jitsu game is I need a head start. And so I'm trying to put myself in a position where I've got a head start. If he has 2 steps to get to the escape, and my progression is only 1 step, then I should be able to win that race, even though I'm a bigger, slower guy. I've created an optimum position for me to progress and him to have to deal with the next thing. And like you said, like always trying to find the concepts. Why is this working? And if I can figure out why this works, not only will it work this time, it'll also work. I'll discover it in other positions. And I think that's why it's important to learn concepts, is because it gives you the opportunity for discovery as you progress through jiu-jitsu. This isn't going to work just in this position. It's also going to work in side control. It's also going to work if I'm on bottom and I know why he's doing that. I know what to avoid before he tries it. So learning these concepts is going to go a long way in progressing of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And I think along the way, you know, if somebody's trying your game plan to learn it, right, as to not get discouraged, like we said earlier, like somebody said, well, that doesn't work, right, and then just stop. So I want them to think of, was there a breakdown in my concept, meaning that did I follow the concept and it didn't work because they did something, right, and figure out, because if that's the case, that's not a big deal, right? Like you're just like, well, here's my concept and he did something that I couldn't stay within the concept, so I just need to fix that. And then there's might be things that pop up that, right, they give you a problem and you just need to address. That's not a big deal. Like every time I do this, the guy does reverse daily heave, or he does something I'm not good at. And maybe that's because he's getting into it before you're getting into your move or whatever that is. So those are all avenues, like you said, I think, to learn, right, for people. So what I'm saying is for people like to stay on the path, because what you're teaching and your game plan and what you do is solid, right? Because you've had success with it and you're very good. And you're a good teacher. And like I said, the most important thing is the concept. The concepts are solid, right? Meaning that it's generally a jiu-jitsu concept we all agree with, right? Where all those things, where the head goes, the body goes, like we always say, like a wrestling concept, right? All that stuff's true. So the most important thing that you and I will always teach people is those kind of things, is why to do things, why things work, some simple shortcuts to make them work better for you to just kind of be, lack of a better term, I use it as a heavyweight, but just lazy, right? I'm never being lazy. Truly not. You're not either, but it's just a funny term to use as a big guy, because we could just pretend we're being lazy, right? So anyway, my point is, I think that super awesome stuff if people take it for what it's worth. Even as, you know, a little guy watching this, probably should have said at the beginning, this is very important, and you've brought it up a few times, is you just need to know what the other person's doing. Reverse engineer it, right? This might not be your game. However, it's Gary's game against you. So if you generally know where he's trying to put you and what he's trying to do, and you can do your best to stay out of it, right? That's jiu-jitsu in a whole. Is you putting somebody in your game plan and somebody else putting you in their game plan. So whoever does that better and whoever defeats the other person's game is going to win, right? So even though we're probably going to label this big guy versus little, you know, whatever, just to be generic, it really is not, right? It's truly not. It's jiu-jitsu, you know, and then people just getting into their stuff. So anyway, I think you did awesome. Hopefully everybody else thinks what I think. I know you think you did awesome because it's your game. So we hope so. I'm just playing. But yeah, I'll tell you what, we'll stop right there, man, because otherwise, like I said, I don't want to be on here like for 4 hours and 45 minutes like the other night. So hopefully that wasn't too bad on you, man. I appreciate it.
It was fine. It was fine.
Okay, I'll do my best. And obviously we're still recording, but to get this put together the right way, and I'll let you know ASAP. Hopefully, you know, we'll get good feedback, man. Awesome job.
All right. Thanks, Miles. Take it easy.
All right, see you, man.